The dying woman's blood stained the snow red, but that wasn't what made Cole Bennett pull his revolver. It was the way her eyes refused to close, how she kept crawling toward the saloon doors even as frost claimed her fingers. Most men would have stepped over her corpse by morning. He almost did. But when she finally collapsed at his boots and whispered, "I'll do anything," something in Cole's chest cracked open for the first time in 8 years. What he offered her next would either save them both or destroy everything he'd spent a lifetime building. Behind them, the blizzard screamed like it wanted them dead. Before we begin this tale of survival, desperation, and the brutal price of second chances, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara and Cole's story travels across the world. Now, settle in. This is going to be a long night. The blizzard hit Timber Ridge at 4 in the afternoon, which meant most folks were already half drunk and mean. Cole Bennett sat at his usual corner table in Murphy's saloon, nursing whiskey he couldn't taste anymore, watching men he barely tolerated pretend they were friends. The fire in the hearth threw shadows across faces he'd known for years. Ranchers who'd survived the same winters, miners who'd lost fingers to frostbite, drifters who'd stay until the wind changed direction. Same faces, same stories, same nothing. He'd stopped listening to their bullshit around the third winter alone. "Bennett!" Jack Murphy shouted from behind the bar, his voice cutting through the noise. "You gonna sit there brooding all night, or you want another?" Cole didn't answer. He just pushed his glass forward an inch, which Murphy knew meant yes. The barkeep was halfway through pouring when the saloon doors slammed open so hard the hinges screamed. The wind came in first, a blast of white fury that killed every conversation in the room. Then came the woman. She wasn't walking. She was falling forward in stages, each step a controlled collapse. Her dress, what was left of it, had probably been nice once, back when it was blue instead of frozen mud brown. No coat. No gloves. Her hair hung in ice-crusted ropes around a face so pale it looked carved from the same snow trying to kill her. She made it 3 steps inside before her knees buckled. The room went silent except for the fire crackling and the storm howling through the open door. 20 men stared at her like she was a ghost. Maybe she was. People didn't survive long in weather like this without proper gear. "Close the damn door!" someone yelled. A miner near the entrance kicked it shut, and the sound jolted the woman back to consciousness. She grabbed the nearest chair, pulled herself upright, and the look in her eyes, Cole sat up straighter. He'd seen that look before, in mirrors, in the faces of cattle who'd survived wolf attacks. It wasn't fear. It was something worse. The absolute refusal to die even when dying made more sense. "I need work." Her voice came out hoarse, wrecked. "Any work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, keep books." "Jesus Christ, girl," Murphy said, leaning over the bar. "You need a doctor, not a job." "I need money." She swayed but didn't fall. "I can start tonight. I don't need much, just enough for what?" This from Tom Garrett, a cattle buyer with a reputation for cruelty and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Enough to buy a coat? Might be too late for that." Laughter rippled through the room. Not kind laughter, the kind men use when they smell weakness and it makes them feel bigger. The woman's jaw tightened. "Enough to eat? Enough to survive until spring. I'm not asking for charity. I'll work for every cent." "You'll freeze first," Garrett said. He was enjoying this now, playing to his audience. "Look at you, half dead already. What makes you think you can survive out here?" "I've survived worse." "Yeah?" Garrett stood up, walked closer. "Like what?" She met his eyes without blinking. "Like men like you." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence had teeth. Garrett's smile disappeared. He moved into her space, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to keep eye contact, close enough to intimidate, close enough to hurt. "Careful, girl. You're in no position to—" "Step back, Garrett." Cole's voice cut through the tension like a knife through fat. He hadn't planned to speak, hadn't planned to move, but his body had other ideas, and now he was standing, hand resting casual-like on the revolver at his hip. Garrett turned, anger bright in his face. "This ain't your business, Bennett." "Didn't say it was. Said step back." For a long moment, nobody moved. The whole saloon held its breath, waiting to see if this would turn into the kind of fight that left bodies on the floor. Cole kept his eyes on Garrett, his hand steady, his expression flat as river stone. Garrett stepped back. He tried to make it look like his choice, tried to save face with a laugh and a theatrical bow, but everybody saw the truth. He'd backed down. "She's all yours, cowboy," Garrett said, returning to his table. "Good luck with that one. She's got more pride than sense." Cole ignored him. He looked at the woman, really looked at her, and saw things other men missed. The way she held herself despite exhaustion, the intelligence burning in those fever-bright eyes, the calluses on her hands that meant she wasn't lying about work, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. "You hungry?" he asked. She blinked, surprised by the simple question. "Yes." "Sit down before you fall down," Cole gestured to his table. "Murphy, bring food. Whatever you got that's hot." "Cole, I don't think I'll pay for it. Bring the food." Murphy muttered something under his breath but disappeared into the back. The woman stared at Cole like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve, then slowly, painfully, lowered herself into the chair across from him. This close, he could see the shivering she'd been hiding, the bluish tint around her lips, the way her fingers couldn't quite close into fists anymore. Frostbite. Maybe bad. "What's your name?" Cole asked, sitting back down. "Clara." She paused. "Clara Whitmore. Where you from, Clara Whitmore?" "East." "It doesn't matter where." Her voice was defensive, guarded. "I'm here now." "Family?" "Dead, lost, gone. Take your pick." She wrapped her arms around herself, though it didn't seem to help the shivering. "Why are you helping me?" "Didn't say I was helping. Said I was buying you dinner." Cole leaned back, studying her. "After that, you're on your own unless you give me a reason otherwise." "I already told you. I can work. I'm not asking for handouts. You're asking for work in a town that barely has enough for the people already here." Cole's voice was flat, factual. "Winter's just started. We got 4 more months of this weather, minimum. Most businesses won't hire until spring thaw, and by then you'll be dead or desperate enough to do things you'll regret." Clara's face hardened. "I've already done things I regret. I'm still here. That's supposed to impress me?" "I don't care about impressing you. I care about surviving." Murphy arrived with a plate of stew and bread that steamed in the cold air. Clara's eyes locked onto it with an intensity that made Cole's chest ache. She didn't grab for it, though. She waited, hands in her lap, like taking charity was harder than starving. "Eat," Cole said quietly. "We'll talk after." She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers and took one bite, then another. Then she was eating like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like, trying to maintain dignity and failing, and the whole saloon was watching her like she was tonight's entertainment. Cole turned in his chair, and his voice carried across the room without him having to shout. "Any of you got a problem? You can take it up with me outside. Otherwise, mind your own damn business." Conversations resumed. Not because they wanted to, but because nobody wanted to test Cole Bennett when his hand was still near his gun. Clara kept eating. She finished the stew, soaked up the last bits with bread, and when it was gone, she sat back with tears in her eyes that she absolutely refused to let fall. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet." Cole signaled Murphy for coffee. "You said you can work. Doing what, specifically?" "Anything. I kept house for a family in St. Louis for 3 years. Before that, I worked in a dress shop. I can read, write, do arithmetic. I'm strong enough for, You're not strong enough to survive the next week." The words landed like a slap. Clara's face flushed with anger and shame. "You don't know what I know you walked into a blizzard without a coat. I know your hands are damaged enough that you might lose fingers. I know you're running from something, and whatever it is, it's bad enough that freezing to death seemed like a reasonable alternative." Cole paused, letting that sink in. "Am I wrong?" Clara's silence was answer enough. "Thought so." Cole took a drink of his whiskey. "Here's the truth nobody else is going to tell you. Timber Ridge doesn't need more workers. It needs fewer mouths to feed. Come spring, you might find something. Might. But winter? You got no chance." "Then why are you wasting time talking to me?" Bitterness crept into Clara's voice. "If I'm as doomed as you say, why bother with the meal and the speech?" "Because I'm about to make you an offer. I already said I'd work." "Not a job offer." Cole set his glass down carefully, and something in his tone made Clara go very still. "A marriage proposal." The saloon, which had been pretending not to listen, went dead silent again. Clara stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You've lost your mind. Probably, but hear me out anyway. You're serious. She looked around the room, then back at him. You're actually serious. You don't even know me. I know enough. Cole's voice was steady, calm, like he was discussing cattle prices instead of proposing marriage to a stranger. You're desperate, stubborn, and smart enough to know when you're beaten. You need somewhere to survive the winter. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I need someone at my ranch who isn't me. You're lonely, so you want to marry a stranger? Disbelief and anger fought for control of Clara's expression. That's insane. Maybe, but it's practical. Cole leaned forward. I got a ranch 8 miles north of here, 300 acres, good water, decent herd. House is solid, built for winter. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor either. You'd have food, shelter, safety. In exchange, you help run the place. Cooking, mending, whatever needs doing. It's not romantic, but it's real. And what else? Clara's eyes narrowed. What else would you expect from a wife? The question hung heavy in the air. Every man in the saloon was listening now, not even pretending otherwise. Cole held Clara's gaze, making sure she saw nothing but honesty in his face. Nothing you don't offer freely, he said quietly. This ain't about forcing anything. It's about survival. Yours and mine, in different ways. You need a way to live through winter. I need someone who won't let my ranch fall apart while I'm trying to hold it together. That's the deal. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Is it? Cole sat back. What's your alternative? Find work that doesn't exist? Sleep in the street and hope you don't freeze? Trust the kindness of strangers? He gestured at the room full of men who'd watched her struggle without offering help. How's that working out? Clara's hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from cold. It was rage and fear and the terrible weight of knowing he was right. Why me? Why not any other woman in this town? Because any other woman in this town is already settled, married, or smart enough not to walk into a blizzard. Cole's voice softened slightly. And because when Garrett got in your face, you didn't back down. That takes spine. I need someone with spine. This is insane, Claire repeated, but there was less conviction in it now. Yeah, it is. Cole stood up, dropped money on the table to cover the food and his drinks. But you got about 3 hours before hypothermia kills you, and I'm the only offer standing between you and a frozen corpse. So here's what's going to happen. Murphy's got a room upstairs. I already paid for it. You're going to sleep there tonight, get warm, think about what I said. Tomorrow morning, you give me your answer, yes or no. If it's no, I'll give you enough money to buy a coat and supplies, and you take your chances. If it's yes, we ride out to the ranch before the next storm hits. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You can't be serious. Dead serious, Cole grabbed his hat from the table. One night. Think about it. That's all I'm asking. He turned to leave, and Clara's voice stopped him. Why? Why what? Why are you doing this? The real reason. Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so low only Clara could hear it. Because I watched my brother freeze to death 10 years ago when I was too weak to save him. Because I've spent every winter since then alone in a house big enough for a family I'll never have. Because when I saw you walk through that door refusing to die, I thought maybe... He stopped, shook his head. Maybe we could help each other not be so goddamn alone. That reason enough for you? He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out of the saloon into the screaming blizzard, leaving Clara sitting at his table with an impossible choice and a room key she hadn't asked for. The saloon erupted the moment the door closed behind him. Did that just happen? Bennett's finally lost it. Poor bastard so lonely he'll marry anything in a skirt. She won't say yes. She'd be crazy to say yes. Clara sat perfectly still, ignoring all of it, staring at the room key on the table like it might explode. Her mind was racing, trying to find the trap, the catch, the inevitable cruelty hiding under Cole Bennett's bizarre offer. But she couldn't find it. She'd gotten good at spotting lies, good at seeing through false kindness and poisoned generosity. She'd learned those lessons the hard way, written them in scars across her heart. But when she replayed Cole's words, his tone, the way he'd looked at her, he meant it, every word, which somehow made it worse. You gonna take him up on it? Murphy asked, refilling her coffee without being asked. Clara jumped. She'd forgotten anyone else was there. I don't know. For what it's worth, Cole Bennett's the most honest man I know. Murphy leaned against the table, his voice dropping low. He don't lie, don't cheat, don't break promises. Been coming here for 8 years, never once caused trouble unless someone else started it first. If he says he'll keep you safe and fed, he will. That doesn't make marrying a stranger any less insane. No, it don't. Murphy smiled slightly. But insane's relative when the alternative is dying alone in the snow. And between you and me, girl, you look about 12 hours away from that being your reality. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she had other options, other plans, other anything. But the words wouldn't come because they'd be lies. And she was so tired of lying. The room's upstairs, Murphy continued, straightening up. Second door on the left. There's blankets, a stove, hot water if you want to wash, door locks from the inside. You're safe here tonight. Why are you being kind to me? Murphy shrugged. Cole paid me to be. And maybe because I got daughters, and I'd hope someone would show them kindness if they were desperate and alone in a town full of strangers. He walked away before Clara could respond, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a choice that felt impossible. She looked around the saloon at the men who'd watched her beg for work and offered nothing but mockery, at the warm fire that barely cut through the cold, at the door beyond which the blizzard was still trying to kill everything in its path. Then she picked up the room key and went upstairs. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a stove that radiated blessed heat, and a window that showed nothing but white fury. Clara locked the door, stripped off her frozen clothes, and stood in front of the stove until feeling returned to her limbs in waves of agony. Her fingers were bad. Not as bad as they could be, but bad enough. 2 on her left hand were black at the tips. She'd probably lose parts of them. The thought made her laugh, a harsh, broken sound that echoed in the empty room. She'd come so far, survived so much, and she might lose her fingers because she'd been too proud to steal a coat. Clara washed herself with hot water from the basin, scrubbing away days of dirt and shame and the smell of desperation. When she was as clean as she could manage, she wrapped herself in every blanket the room offered and sat on the bed, staring at nothing. Cole Bennett's offer rattled around in her head like stones in a can. Marriage to a stranger, partnership with a lonely rancher, safety in exchange for labor. It was transactional, practical, and completely absurd. It was also the only real option she had. Clara had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago with money stolen from a man who'd promised to marry her and then sold her virtue to his friends for entertainment. She'd walked away from that life with $50, a dress, and determination to start over somewhere nobody knew her name or her shame. The $50 ran out in Denver. The dress got ruined on the road. The determination was the only thing she had left. She thought maybe Timber Ridge would be far enough, remote enough, new enough that she could disappear into honest work and rebuild something resembling a life. But winter had come early and hard, and the town was smaller and meaner than she'd hoped. Cole Bennett was right. She had no good options. Work didn't exist. Charity wouldn't last. And she'd already learned what men expected when they offered help to desperate women. But Cole hadn't looked at her like that. He'd looked at her like a person, not an opportunity. He'd offered marriage like a business arrangement, not a chance to take advantage. And when Garrett had gotten in her face, Cole had stood up without being asked. That meant something. Maybe not love, but something. Clara pulled the blankets tighter and tried to imagine life on a remote ranch with a man she didn't know. Cooking his meals, mending his clothes, surviving winter together in a house he'd built for a family that never came. It sounded lonely, but she was already lonely. At least this way, she'd be warm. Outside, the blizzard howled like it had opinions about her choice. Clara closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. She woke to silence. The storm had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the world buried in fresh snow that glowed pink in the dawn light. Clara dressed in her ruined clothes because they were all she had, then went downstairs to find Murphy sweeping the empty saloon. "Coffee's hot," he said without looking up. "Bennett's outside waiting." Clara's stomach dropped. "He said tomorrow morning. I still have time to—" "Oh, it is tomorrow morning." Murphy gestured to the window where pale sunlight was just cresting the horizon. "Sun's up. Decision time. Clara poured herself coffee with shaking hands and went to the window. Sure enough, Cole Bennett stood in the street next to two horses, looking like he'd been there for hours. He wasn't pacing or fidgeting or showing any sign of impatience. He just stood there, still as a mountain, waiting. "What should I do?" Clara whispered. Murphy stopped sweeping. "Can't answer that for you, girl. But I will say this. You got two choices. Take a risk on Bennett or take a risk on yourself. Either way, you're gambling with your life. Question is, which bet feels less likely to kill you?" Clara drank her coffee and thought about frozen fingers and empty stomachs and men who smiled while they hurt you. Then she thought about Cole's quiet honesty, his strange proposal, the way he'd stood between her and Garrett without being asked. She set down the cup. "Thank you for the room," she said to Murphy. "You gonna do it? Gonna marry him?" Clara didn't answer. She just walked to the door, stepped out into the brutal cold, and crossed the street to where Cole Bennett waited beside his horses. He looked at her approach without expression, his face impossible to read. "Morning. Morning." Clara's breath came out in white clouds. "I have questions." "I'd be worried if you didn't. If I say yes, what happens? We just ride to your ranch and that's it? We're married?" "First we ride to the church. Father McKinley will do the ceremony if I ask. Then we ride to the ranch." Cole's voice was matter-of-fact. "Unless you want something different." "I don't have a dress. I don't have anything." "I noticed." Cole gestured to one of the horses, where a bundle was tied to the saddle. "Bought you a coat, gloves, boots. They'll do until we get you proper clothes." Clara stared at the bundle. "You bought me clothes before I said yes?" "Bought them whether you said yes or no. Couldn't let you freeze either way." He paused. "That answer your question, or you got more?" "What if it doesn't work? What if we can't stand each other?" "Then we figure it out come spring. But we survive winter first." Cole's eyes were steady on hers. "I ain't expecting this to be easy, Clara. I'm expecting it to be hard, uncomfortable, and probably full of arguments. But it'll be those things while you're warm and fed and safe. That's what I'm offering. Nothing more, nothing less." "And you'll really—" She hesitated, hating that she had to ask. "You won't force anything?" "No." The word was flat, final. "You got my word on that, and my word's all I got worth giving." Clara looked at this strange, quiet man who'd proposed marriage in a saloon and meant it. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons she should say no, all the fear screaming at her to run. Then she thought about the alternative. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Relief, maybe, or just acknowledgement. "All right then, put on the coat. We got a church to visit and weather coming this afternoon." Clara unwrapped the bundle with numb fingers. The coat was heavy wool, warm and practical, slightly too big but serviceable. The boots fit better than anything she'd worn in weeks. The gloves were lined with fur. It was more than anyone had given her in years. She dressed quickly, trying to ignore the way her heart was hammering, trying to convince herself this was just survival and not the most insane thing she'd ever done. Cole helped her onto one of the horses, a patient mare who didn't spook at Clara's nervousness. Then he mounted his own horse, and they rode through the silent, snow-buried town toward the small church at the end of the main street. Father McKinley was old, half-deaf, and asked no questions when Cole explained what they needed. He performed the ceremony in front of a crooked altar while early morning light filtered through ice-covered windows. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just two strangers making promises they hoped they could keep. "Do you, Cole Bennett, take this woman to be your wife?" "I do." "And do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your husband?" Clara opened her mouth. The words stuck in her throat. She looked at Cole standing beside her in his worn coat and scarred boots, offering her survival wrapped in vows, and thought, "This is insane. This is absolutely insane." "I do," she whispered. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Father McKinley smiled gently. "You may kiss the bride if you're so inclined." Cole looked at Clara. Clara looked at Cole. Neither of them moved. "We'll skip that part," Cole said quietly. "As you wish." The priest handed them a marriage certificate written in shaky handwriting. "Blessings on your union. May you find warmth in each other during the cold seasons ahead." They signed the document, Clara's hand trembling, Cole's steady. and then they were married. Just like that. Clara followed Cole out of the church in a daze, everything feeling distant and unreal. She was married, to a stranger. After less than 12 hours of knowing he existed, her mother would have died of shame, her father would have called her a fool. Maybe they would have been right. Cole helped her back onto the mare, then swung onto his own horse. Ranch is 8 miles north. We'll be there by noon if the weather holds. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode out of Timber Ridge as the town was waking up, leaving behind the saloon and Murphy's kindness and the last chance to change her mind. The trail led into the mountains, through forests heavy with snow, past frozen streams and valleys that looked like they'd never seen human life. The silence was enormous. After an hour of riding, Clara's fear began shifting into something else, awareness. She noticed the way Cole rode, confident, alert, reading the landscape like a language she didn't speak, the way he chose the safest paths without hesitation, the way he stopped twice to let the horses rest and made sure Clara drank water even though she hadn't asked. He wasn't chatty, wasn't warm, but he was careful with her in a way that felt deliberate, like he'd thought about what she might need and planned accordingly. "You doing all right?" he asked during the second rest. "I think so." Clara's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "How much further?" "About 3 miles. We'll get there before the next storm." Cole glanced at the sky, reading something in the clouds. "Tonight's going to be rough. We'll need to get the horses settled fast. What should I do?" "Follow my lead. Help where you can. Don't try to prove anything." He looked at her directly. "You're going to be tired and scared and probably regretting this decision. That's normal. Push through it anyway." His honesty was jarring. Most men would have offered false comfort. Cole just told the truth and expected her to handle it. Clara found herself almost smiling. "You're not much for reassurance, are you?" "Nope, but I'm good at surviving, and now that includes keeping you alive too." Something that might have been humor flickered in his eyes. "You'll learn to appreciate the difference." They mounted up and rode the final miles through increasingly dense forest. The trail got rougher, the snow deeper, and Clara's exhaustion settled into her bones like ice. Just when she thought she couldn't ride any further, the trees opened up. And there it was, Cole Bennett's ranch. The house was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, solid log construction, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Behind it stood a barn, a smaller outbuilding, and corrals currently empty except for snow. The land rolled away in gentle hills, bordered by mountains that looked close enough to touch. It was beautiful in a harsh, lonely way. It was also completely isolated. Clara's chest tightened. This was it. This was where she'd spend the winter, maybe longer, with a man she'd known for less than a day, in a place so remote that screaming wouldn't bring help. "Welcome home," Cole said quietly. Home. The word felt foreign. They rode to the barn and Cole helped her dismount before tending to both horses with efficient, practiced movements. Clara tried to help, but mostly just stood there, overwhelmed and useless, until Cole handed her a brush. "Curry the mare while I handle the gelding. Long strokes, gentle pressure. She'll tell you if you're doing it wrong." Clara took the brush with frozen fingers and did her best. The mare was patient with her clumsy efforts, and the work felt good. Gave her something to focus on besides the enormity of what she'd just done. By the time both horses were brushed, fed, and settled, the light outside had changed. The temperature was dropping fast. Cole grabbed their supplies and led Clara to the house, unlocking the door with a key that looked older than both of them combined. The interior was dark, cold, and smelled like abandonment. Cole moved through it with the confidence of someone who knew every inch, lighting lamps and stoking the fireplace until warmth began creeping into the corners. Clara stood in the main room, looking at the life Cole had built alone. Sturdy furniture, clean floors, books on shelves, a kitchen that showed signs of use but not comfort. Everything was functional, practical, and deeply sad in a way she couldn't quite name. This was what 8 years of loneliness looked like. "Bedroom's upstairs," Cole said, not looking at her. "I'll sleep down here for now. You take the bed." "You don't have to." "I do, actually." He still wouldn't meet her eyes. "We both need sleep, and we both need space to figure out what the hell we just did. Separate rooms makes that easier." Clara wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. He was right. Everything was too strange, too fast, too overwhelming. "Okay," she whispered. Cole showed her the bedroom, a simple space with a large bed, a dresser, and windows that overlooked the mountains. He brought her bags up, then hesitated at the door. Clara? She turned. This was the first time he'd said her name since the church. Thank you, he said quietly, for saying yes, for taking the risk. I know it wasn't easy. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him, and Clara was alone in a stranger's bedroom in a house miles from anywhere, wearing a wedding ring she'd owned for 4 hours. She sat on the bed and started laughing. It came out broken and half hysterical, tears mixing with the sound, her whole body shaking with the absurdity of everything. She'd married a cowboy she didn't know. She'd promised to spend her life with someone she'd met during a blizzard. She'd bet her entire future on one man's word because the alternative was freezing to death. And now here she was, Mrs. Cole Bennett, wife to a lonely rancher, partner in survival. The laughter turned to sobs, and Clara cried until she had nothing left. Then she curled up on the bed, still wearing her coat and boots because she was too tired to take them off, and fell into the kind of sleep that comes after impossible decisions. Outside, the storm returned with a vengeance, burying the ranch under 3 feet of new snow. Inside, 2 strangers who were now husband and wife slept in separate rooms, both wondering what the hell came next. And somewhere in the darkness between them, the possibility of something real began taking root. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile shoots of trust. Clara woke to the sound of something breaking downstairs. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness, heart hammering, mind still tangled in dreams about St. Louis and men with cruel smiles. For a terrible moment, she didn't know where she was. Then reality crashed back. The ranch. Cole Bennett. The marriage. Another crash, followed by muffled cursing. She sat up, disoriented. Gray light filtered through the window, meaning dawn was still hours away. The room was freezing despite the coat she'd fallen asleep in. Her breath came out in clouds. Downstairs, Cole's voice rumbled something she couldn't make out. Then there was the sound of wood scraping against wood. Clara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and crept to the door. Her fingers, the damaged ones, ached in the cold, a constant reminder of how close she'd come to losing more than just her pride. She eased the door open and peered down the stairs. Cole stood in the main room surrounded by what looked like the remains of a chair. He was dressed, boots on, hair wet like he'd been outside already. The fire in the hearth blazed hot enough to hurt, and he was dragging furniture closer to it with single-minded intensity. "What are you doing?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. Cole jerked around, surprise flickering across his face before settling back into its usual neutral mask. "Didn't mean to wake you. You broke a chair." "Oh, yeah, well." He kicked at a splintered leg. "Damn thing collapsed when I sat on it. Been meaning to fix it for months." Clara descended the stairs slowly, clutching the blanket. "What time is it? 4, maybe. Storm stopped an hour ago, but there's 3 feet of new snow out there." Cole gestured vaguely at the door. "Took me 40 minutes just to dig a path to the barn." "You've been outside?" Clara looked at the wetness still clinging to his coat, the snow melting in puddles around his boots. "In the dark?" "Horses don't care about daylight. They need feeding whether it's convenient or not." He moved past her toward the kitchen. "You want coffee?" Yes, please." Clara followed him, watching as he worked the old stove with practiced ease. The kitchen was cleaner than she'd expected, but sparse, functional. Like everything else in this house, it showed signs of use without any warmth. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question. Too personal. Too soon. But Cole answered without hesitation. "Built the house 9 years ago. Spent 2 winters in a shack before I could afford proper walls." He measured coffee grounds into a battered pot. "Been alone here for 8 of those years." "What happened to—" Clara stopped, but Cole filled in the blank. "My wife?" He laughed, and it was the saddest sound Clara had ever heard. "Never had one. Not before you. That's what I meant yesterday when I said I was widowed by loneliness instead of death." The coffee started percolating, filling the kitchen with a smell that made Clara's empty stomach clench. She realized she hadn't eaten since the stew Murphy gave her, and that felt like a lifetime ago. "There's bread in the box," Cole said, reading her expression. "And some dried meat. It ain't much, but it'll hold you until I can make a proper breakfast." Clara found the bread, hard and stale but edible, and tore off a piece. The act of chewing gave her something to do besides stare at this man who was now legally her husband. In daylight, or what passed for it, she could see details she'd missed in the saloon. The scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his shoulders carried tension like a permanent weight, the lines around his eyes that came from squinting at horizons. He looked older than she'd first thought, mid-30s maybe, old enough to have accumulated regrets. How old are you? The question came out before Clara could stop it. 34? Cole poured coffee into 2 tin cups. You? 23? Jesus. He set 1 cup in front of her harder than necessary. You're just a kid. I'm old enough to be married, apparently. Anger flared in Clara's chest. Old enough to make my own choices. Didn't say you weren't, said you're young. Cole took a long drink of his coffee, grimaced. Young enough that this was probably the worst decision of your life. You're the one who proposed. I know what I did. His voice was flat. Doesn't make it smart. For either of us. They stood in uncomfortable silence, drinking bitter coffee while the fire crackled and the wind rattled the windows. Clara's mind raced with questions she didn't know how to ask. What happened now? What did he expect from her? How did 2 strangers pretend to be married when they could barely stand in the same room without awkwardness thick enough to choke on? Look, Cole finally said, setting down his cup. We need to establish some ground rules. Figure out how this is going to work. Okay. Clara's fingers tightened around her own cup. Like what? Like chores, division of labor. Who does what? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I handle everything outside, livestock, repairs, hunting, wood chopping. You handle inside, cooking, cleaning, mending. Sound fair? I don't know how to cook much, just basic things. Then you'll learn. I'll teach you what I can. He paused. What else can you do? You said you kept house before. Laundry, mending, basic sewing. I can read and write, keep accounts if you need it. Clara heard the defensive edge in her voice and hated it. I'm not useless. Didn't say you were. Just trying to figure out what we're working with. Cole's expression didn't change. Can you shoot? A gun? No. Then that's something else you'll learn. Can't have you defenseless out here. Defenseless from what? Wolves, mostly. Bears, if we're unlucky. Sometimes drifters come through looking for easy targets. He said it so matter-of-factly that Clara's stomach dropped. Ranch this isolated, you need to know how to protect yourself. Clara set down her coffee before her shaking hands could spill it. You're saying I might need to shoot someone. I'm saying if someone breaks into this house while I'm out working and you can't defend yourself, you're going to have a real bad day. Cole's eyes were steady on hers. This ain't St. Louis, Clara. Out here, people die from being unprepared. I won't let that happen to you. The way he said it, like her survival was now his responsibility, made something twist in Clara's chest. She didn't know if it was gratitude or resentment or just fear wearing a different mask. When do we start? She asked quietly. Today, after breakfast. Cole pushed away from the counter. I'll show you around, teach you the routine. We'll start shooting lessons tomorrow if the weather holds. He moved to the stove and started pulling out supplies for what Clara assumed would be breakfast. She watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he didn't waste motion or energy. He'd been doing this alone for so long that he'd streamlined everything down to its essential components. Can I help? Clara asked. You know how to make biscuits? No. Then watch. Next time you'll do it yourself. He mixed flour and lard with quick, practiced movements. Pay attention to the measurements. Too much of anything, and they'll turn out like rocks. Clara moved closer, watching as he formed the dough and cut it into rough circles. His hands were scarred, calloused, with old burns across the knuckles. Working hands. Hands that had built this house, survived impossible winters, buried a brother. What happened to him? The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Your brother. Cole's hand stilled for just a moment. Got caught in a storm. We were both young and stupid, thought we could make it back from town before the weather turned. We were wrong. He placed the biscuits in a pan and slid them into the oven. He fell through ice crossing a stream. I got him out, but we were miles from shelter. By the time we found a cave, he was too far gone. Died in my arms talking about seeing Mama again. The words were delivered without emotion, but Clara heard the grief underneath. Old pain, sealed over but not healed. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Yeah, well, sorry doesn't change anything." Cole moved to slice the dried meat. "But it taught me something important. This land doesn't care about your plans or your feelings. It'll kill you the first chance it gets if you're not paying attention. That's why you're going to learn to survive out here, Clara. Because I'll be damned if I watch another person die from being unprepared." They ate breakfast in silence. Biscuits that were better than Clara expected, and meat that was worse. When they finished, Cole handed her a coat that was even heavier than the one he'd bought her yesterday. "This was going to be for—" He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It's yours now. Put it on." Clara did, swimming in wool and fur that smelled like cedar and smoke. "Who was it for?" "Someone who doesn't need it anymore." Cole's voice closed like a door. "Come on, daylight's burning." The world outside was blindingly white. Snow covered everything in drifts so deep, Clara couldn't see the path Cole claimed to have dug earlier. But he led the way with sure steps, and she followed in his footsteps, literally walking in the trenches he'd carved. The barn was warmer than the house, full of the smell of hay and horses. Two animals watched their approach with calm interest. The mare Clara had ridden yesterday, and Cole's gelding, both healthy and well-kept. "This is where you'll spend a fair amount of time," Cole said, grabbing a pitchfork. "Horses need feeding twice a day, water checked constantly in winter so it doesn't freeze. You'll muck stalls, distribute hay, brush them down after any work." "I don't know how to do any of that." "Then I'll teach you. Watch." He demonstrated the feeding process, explaining as he went. "Each horse gets 2 flakes of hay morning and night, more if we've been working them hard. Check the water. See how it's already got ice forming? That needs to be broken up and replaced with fresh." Clara tried to absorb it all, but there was too much information coming too fast. How much hay? How to tell if a horse was sick, where the tack was kept. How to check hooves for stones. "You'll forget most of this," Cole said, reading her expression. "That's fine. We'll go through it again tomorrow and the day after until it sticks." They spent the next 2 hours working in the barn. Cole handled the heavy lifting while teaching Clara the smaller tasks, brushing the mare, checking her hooves, learning to read the animal's body language. The mare was patient with Clara's clumsy efforts, and gradually Clara felt some of her tension ease. This she could do. This was concrete, practical, much easier than navigating the strange emotional landscape of her sudden marriage. When they finished, Cole led her to the smaller outbuilding. Inside was a workshop that smelled like sawdust and oil, filled with tools Clara couldn't name and half-finished projects gathering dust. "This is where I fix things when they break," Cole explained. "You probably won't spend much time here, but you should know where everything is in case you need it." He showed her the basics, where he kept nails, rope, spare leather for tack, the grinding wheel for sharpening tools. Then he pulled out a rifle from a locked cabinet, and Clara's stomach clenched. "This is a Winchester repeater," Cole said, handling the weapon with casual familiarity. "Holds 15 rounds, accurate at range, reliable in cold weather. You'll learn to shoot with this." "Not today, though," Clara said quickly. "No, not today. Today you just need to know it exists and where it's kept." He locked the rifle away. "But soon. Can't keep putting it off because it makes you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," Clara lied. Cole's look told her he knew exactly how full of shit she was, but he didn't call her on it. Instead, he led her back outside, showing her the lay of the land. The corrals where he'd keep cattle come spring, the creek that ran through the property, currently frozen solid, the tree line where he hunted. 300 acres, he said, gesturing at the expanse of white. "It's not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's mine. Paid for it with money I saved working cattle drives. Built every structure you see with my own hands." There was quiet pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's honest." Clara looked at the ranch with new eyes. Every fence post represented hours of work. Every building was a small victory against the wilderness. One man had carved out a life here through sheer stubbornness and refusal to quit. "It's impressive," she said, and meant it. Cole glanced at her, something like surprise crossing his face. "You think so?" "I think most people would have given up, especially alone." Clara pulled the coat tighter against the wind. "But you didn't. Giving up wasn't an option." He started walking back toward the house. "When you got nothing else, you got to prove you can survive anyway. Otherwise, what's the point?" They trudged through snow in silence, and Clara found herself wondering what drove a man to such isolation. What had he been running from, or running toward? The questions piled up in her mind like the snow piling around them. Back in the house, Cole built up the fire, while Clara tried to make herself useful organizing the kitchen. She found supplies stored haphazardly, flour mixed with tools, dried goods shoved wherever they fit. It was the kitchen of someone who cooked out of necessity, not comfort. "I'm going to reorganize this," Clara announced, "if that's all right." Cole looked up from the fire. "Do whatever you want. It's your kitchen now." Your kitchen. The words hung in the air between them, strange and weighted. This was her house now, her life, her husband standing there watching her with eyes that gave nothing away. "I should probably know more about you," Clara said, surprising herself. "If we're going to make this work." "What do you want to know?" Everything, Clara thought. Nothing. "Where are you from originally?" "Missouri, small town outside Kansas City." Cole sat in the chair that hadn't broken, stretching his legs toward the fire. "My folks had a farm, decent land, good soil. Should have been enough. But it wasn't? Bank took it when I was 17. Drought killed the crops 3 years running, and my father couldn't make the payments." His voice was flat, factual. "He shot himself in the barn rather than face losing the land. Mama died 6 months later. Never said it was a broken heart, but we all knew." Clara's hand stilled on the tin of flowers she was relocating. "I'm sorry. That was a long time ago." Cole stared into the fire. "Me and my brother headed west figuring we'd start over. Worked cattle drives, saved money, dreamed about having our own place. Then he died, and I had to do it alone." "Why here? Why Colorado?" "Because it was far enough from Missouri that I couldn't smell the failure." He said it without self-pity, just stating facts. "And because nobody out here gives a damn about who you were before. Only matters who you are now." Clara understood that better than he knew. She turned back to the kitchen, organizing supplies with hands that shook slightly. They were both running from something, both trying to build new lives from the wreckage of old ones. Maybe that's why his insane proposal had worked. Two broken people, equally desperate, making a bargain that looked like madness from the outside but made perfect sense when you were standing in the cold with nowhere else to go. "What about you?" Cole asked. "What's your story?" Clara's hands froze. She'd known this question was coming but hadn't prepared an answer. How much truth did she owe him? How much could she stand to reveal? "I was supposed to get married," she said slowly, "in St. Louis, to a man I thought was respectable." "What happened?" "He wasn't respectable." Claire's voice went hard. "He was a liar who made promises he never intended to keep. When I realized what he really wanted, I left." "With $50 and nothing else," Cole said, remembering what she'd implied in the saloon. "I stole the money from him. Figured he owed me that much." Clara forced herself to meet Cole's eyes. "So now you know. You married a thief." "I married a survivor," Cole corrected. "There's a difference." Something in Clara's chest unclenched. She'd expected judgment, disgust, maybe regret. Instead, Cole just looked at her like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "We're quite a pair," she said with a shaky laugh. "Yeah." Cole stood up, stretched. "Two people running from bad pasts, stuck in the middle of nowhere, pretending we know what we're doing. Should be a disaster." "You think it will be?" "I think it'll be exactly as hard as we make it." He moved toward the door. "I gotta check the horses one more time before dark. You good here?" Clara nodded. Cole left, and she was alone in the strange house that was now supposed to be her home. She finished organizing the kitchen because she needed something to do with her hands. Then she found cleaning supplies and attacked the main room with the kind of intensity that came from needing to feel useful. The house wasn't dirty exactly, but it had the dusty neglect of a place where nobody cared about comfort. Clara cared. Maybe because it gave her control over something, or maybe because creating order from chaos was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. By the time Cole returned, she'd scrubbed every surface, swept the floors, and rearranged the furniture so the room felt less like a cave and more like a space where people might actually live. He stopped in the doorway, snow still clinging to his coat, staring at the transformation. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I needed to feel like I was contributing something." Clara set down the broom. "This is what I know how to do." Cole walked through in the room slowly, taking in the changes. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. It looks good, he said quietly. Looks like a home. That night they ate dinner at the table Clara had scrubbed. Venison stew Cole had made with what remained of last week's hunt. It was better than Clara expected, well seasoned and hearty. They ate in silence that was less uncomfortable than it had been that morning. Afterward, Clara washed dishes while Cole sat by the fire reading a book with pages so worn they were soft as cloth. She found herself watching him, this stranger she'd married, trying to understand what kind of man proposed to someone after knowing them for 20 minutes. "Can I ask you something?" Clara dried the last plate. "Go ahead." "Why me?" Really, there had to be other options. Cole set down his book. "You want the truth or the polite version?" "Truth. Because when I saw you refuse to back down from Garrett even though you were half dead, I saw someone who wouldn't quit." He met her eyes. "I've spent 8 years alone on this ranch because I couldn't find anyone willing to survive out here with me. Most women want comfort, safety, civilization. You were already willing to die rather than give up your pride. That's the kind of stubborn I need." Clara didn't know whether to be insulted or complimented. "So you married me for my stubbornness. I married you because you reminded me of me. And I figured if you could survive whatever hell brought you here, you could survive a winter on this ranch." He picked up his book again. "Was I wrong?" "I don't know yet." Clara moved to the fire, warming her damaged fingers. "Ask me again in spring." "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, wind picked up again, rattling the windows, reminding them both how isolated they were, how dependent on each other. "Cole?" Clara's voice was quiet. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For this. For giving me a chance when I had nothing left." He didn't look up from his book, but his voice was softer when he answered. "Thank you for saying yes. For trusting me when you had no reason to." Clara went upstairs to the bedroom that was supposedly hers, changed into a nightgown Cole had somehow procured, and lay in the darkness listening to the house settle. Below, she heard Cole moving around, banking the fire, checking locks, doing all the small tasks that kept them safe through the night. This was her life now. This house. This man. This strange arrangement that was equal parts practical and insane. She thought about St. Louis, about the man who'd betrayed her, about the desperate journey that had led her to Timber Ridge. Every choice, every mistake, every moment of suffering had brought her here. To a ranch in the mountains, to a marriage built on survival rather than love, to a future she couldn't predict. Clara pulled the blankets tighter and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Instead, she focused on what she knew. She was warm, fed, and safe. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. That had to count for something. Downstairs, Cole sat by the dying fire long after Clara's footsteps stopped. He stared into the embers and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. A wife. After all these years of solitude, he'd gone and married a woman he barely knew. She was nothing like he'd expected. Stronger, sharper, more damaged. When she'd admitted to stealing that money, he'd seen the fear in her eyes, waiting for his judgment, his rejection. But he understood desperation better than most, understood what it meant to do terrible things just to survive. They were both broken in different ways. Maybe that's what made this possible. Two damaged people, too stubborn to quit, making a bargain in the middle of a blizzard. Cole finished his whiskey and headed to the makeshift bed he'd arranged near the fire. Sleep came slowly, his mind too full of questions without answers. But eventually, exhaustion won, and he drifted off to the sound of wind battering the house like it was trying to get inside. 3 days passed in a strange rhythm. Morning started before dawn with Cole feeding the horses while Clara learned to make coffee without burning it. Breakfast was quiet, efficient, both of them still learning how to exist in the same space. Then chores. Cole outside handling the brutal work of keeping a ranch running in winter. Clara inside transforming the house room by room. She cleaned with the intensity of someone trying to erase the past. Scrubbed floors, washed windows, mended torn curtains Cole hadn't even noticed were damaged. She found linens in a trunk, ancient and dusty, and spent an entire afternoon washing them until they were fresh enough to use. Cole would return from outside work to find another transformation. The bedroom upstairs suddenly had clean sheets and organized drawers. The kitchen had herbs drying over the stove. The main room had books arranged by size instead of scattered randomly. "You're nesting," he observed on the third evening. Clara looked up from darning one of his shirts. "I'm making it livable." It was livable before. It was survivable. There's a difference. She bit off thread with her teeth. "You've been surviving out here. I'm trying to make us live." Cole didn't argue. Truth was, the house felt different with her in it. Felt less like a shelter and more like a home. He'd gotten so used to the emptiness that he'd forgotten what warmth looked like. But it wasn't all smooth. They had their first real fight on the fourth day. Clara had been cooking dinner, attempting to follow Cole's terse instructions for making cornbread, when he came inside muddy and bleeding from a gash on his hand. "What happened?" Clara dropped the spoon she'd been using. "Nothing. Just a cut." Cole moved to the basin to wash it. "That's not nothing. That needs stitches." Clara grabbed his wrist before he could pull away. "Sit down." "I can handle—" "Sit. Down." Her voice carried an authority that surprised them both. Cole sat, more from shock than compliance. Clara fetched the medical supplies he kept in a cupboard, cleaned the wound with hands that were steadier than his, and stitched the gash with neat, efficient movements. "Where'd you learn that?" Cole asked through gritted teeth. "I used to help the doctor in St. Louis sometimes. Paid better than the dress shop." Clara tied off the last stitch. "This was stupid. You should have been more careful." "I was fixing a fence, and the wire snapped. Wasn't about being careful." "Then you should have waited for help instead of doing it alone." "I've been doing everything alone for 8 years. Don't need help now." Clara's hand stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. "You do, though. That's the whole point of this arrangement. You're not alone anymore, Cole. Stop acting like you are." "I didn't marry you to have someone tell me what to do." "No, you married me so you'd have someone to cook and clean and make your house pretty." Anger flashed in Clara's eyes. "Well, guess what? That goes both ways. You want me here? Then stop treating me like I'm invisible except when you need something." The words hung between them, sharp and true. Cole opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. He'd been so used to solitude that he kept defaulting to old habits, disappearing outside for hours, not speaking unless necessary, living parallel to Clara instead of with her. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Clara finished bandaging his hand in silence. When she was done, she didn't move away. "I know this is hard for you," she said, "having someone in your space. I get it. But we made a deal, and part of that deal is learning to actually be married instead of just roommates who signed papers." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I." Clara's voice softened. "But we could at least try." That night they sat by the fire after dinner and actually talked. Not about chores or the weather or practical matters, but real things. Cole told her about the first winter on the ranch, when he'd nearly frozen because he didn't know how to properly bank a fire. Clara told him about working in the dress shop, hemming gowns for rich women while wearing clothes with patches. They laughed, actually laughed. And for the first time since their wedding, the conversation felt almost natural. "I should teach you to shoot tomorrow," Cole said. "Weather's supposed to clear." Clara's smile faded. "Do I have to?" "Yes." "I don't like guns." "Neither do I, but that doesn't change the fact that you need to know how to use one." Cole's voice was firm. "This isn't optional, Clara. It's survival." She wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. He was right, and they both knew it. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Cole set up targets behind the barn, old bottles lined up on a fence post, and showed Clara how to hold the rifle. "It's going to kick," he warned, standing behind her to adjust her stance. "Don't fight it. Let it happen and readjust." Clara's hands shook on the Winchester. Cole's presence behind her was overwhelming, the first time they'd been this close since the wedding. She could feel the heat of him despite the cold, smell wood smoke and leather and horse. "Breathe," he said quietly, "then squeeze the trigger. Don't pull." She did. The rifle kicked hard enough to bruise her shoulder and the shot went wide, missing every bottle by yards. Again. They spent 2 hours in the snow, Clara firing until her shoulder ached and her hands were numb. By the end, she could hit a bottle 1 time out of 5, which Cole said was good enough for now. "We'll practice every few days until it's second nature," he said, taking the rifle back. Clara rubbed her sore shoulder. I still don't like it. You don't have to like it. You just have to do it. Cole's expression was serious. If something happens, if someone comes here meaning harm, I need to know you can defend yourself. Can't protect you if I'm not here. Nothing's going to happen. You don't know that. He looked at her directly. This land attracts desperate people, Clara. People who'll take what they want if they think they can get away with it. You're alone here most days. That makes you vulnerable. The blunt honesty made Clara's stomach clench. She'd been so focused on surviving winter that she hadn't thought about other dangers. Human dangers. Okay, she said quietly. I'll practice. I'll get better. Something like relief crossed Cole's face. Good. 2 weeks into their marriage, a storm hit that made the blizzard that brought Clara to Timber Ridge look gentle by comparison. It came on fast, turning the sky black by mid-afternoon, and by evening the wind was screaming so loud it hurt to hear. Cole brought the horses into the barn, secured everything that could blow away, and came inside covered in ice. This is going to be bad, he said, stripping off frozen layers. Could last days. He was right. The storm raged for 72 hours straight, burying the ranch under snow so deep the windows were half covered. They were trapped inside together, forced into closer quarters than they'd managed so far. The first day was awkward. Too much awareness of the other person, too little space to escape. Clara tried to give Cole room while he prowled the house like a caged animal, checking and rechecking supplies, unable to sit still. The second day was better. They fell into a rhythm, Clara cooking, mending, reading aloud from Cole's small collection of books, while he carved new handles for tools that didn't need fixing. The third day, something shifted. They were sitting by the fire, Clara reading from a collection of frontier stories, when she came to a passage about a woman dying in childbirth. Her voice faltered, went quiet. What's wrong? Cole looked up from his carving. Nothing, just... Clara closed the book. Do you want children? The question clearly caught him off guard. I hadn't thought about it. You never thought about having a family in all those years alone? I thought about it, Cole admitted, but thinking about something and making it happen are different things. I'd convinced myself it wasn't possible anymore. And now? He met her eyes. Now I don't know. That's something you want? Clara had been avoiding this question since she said yes to his proposal. Did she want children? With Cole? With a man she barely knew, in a marriage built on desperation rather than love? I don't know, she said honestly. Part of me does. Part of me is terrified. Terrified of what? Of bringing a child into this. Clara gestured at the storm-wrapped house. Of dying like the woman in that story. Of being trapped here forever. The last part came out before she could stop it, and Cole's face hardened. You feel trapped, he said flatly. No, I didn't mean... Clara fumbled for words. I just meant that this is so isolated, and winter is so long, and sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. You could have said no. I had no other options. Everyone's got options. You chose this one. Cole stood up, set aside his carving. If you want to leave come spring, say so now. Don't waste both our time pretending this is something it's not. I'm not pretending anything. Claire stood too, angry now. I'm trying to be honest with you, trying to figure out what the hell we're doing here. We're married, Cole. Legally married. But we don't talk, don't touch, barely look at each other most days. So forgive me for wondering if this is all there's ever going to be. The words echoed in the small space. Cole stared at her, jaw tight, emotions warring across his face. What do you want from me? He finally asked. Clara didn't know how to answer. What did she want? Safety? Yes. But also something more. Something she was afraid to name. I want to know if this is forever, she said quietly. If this marriage is just a business arrangement that ends when winter does, or if we're actually trying to build something real. I don't know how to build something real. Cole's voice was rough. I've been alone so long I've forgotten how to be anything else. Then we learn together. Clara took a step closer. But I need to know you want to try. Because I can survive on my own if I have to. I proved that. But if I'm staying here, if I'm really your wife, then it has to mean something more than just shared chores and separate beds. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance between them. He reached out and touched her face with his scarred, calloused hand. I'm not good at this, he said quietly. Never have been. but I'll try. If you're willing to be patient with me. Clara's breath caught. It was the first time he'd touched her since the day they met, the first real admission that this might be more than just survival. I can be patient, she whispered. Cole leaned down and kissed her. It was tentative, awkward, nothing like the dramatic kisses Clara had read about in books. But it was real, honest. And when they broke apart, something fundamental had changed between them. We'll figure it out, Cole said, his forehead resting against hers. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving the world transformed and silent. Clara and Cole dug their way out together, working side by side, and when Clara looked back at the house, she didn't see a prison anymore. She saw possibility. Spring arrived like a broken promise, late, grudging, and mean. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen ground that refused to thaw. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Cole worked to repair winter damage, his movements stiff from months of cold that had settled into his bones like an old injury. They'd survived. Barely. But survival and living were turning out to be two very different things. The kiss during the storm had changed something between them, opened a door neither knew how to walk through. They were gentler with each other now, more careful. Cole's hand would linger on Clara's shoulder when he passed. Clara would touch his arm when she wanted his attention. Small gestures that meant everything and nothing. But they still slept in separate rooms. Still moved around each other with the caution of people afraid to break something fragile. "How's the fence line?" Clara asked when Cole came in for lunch, mud caked on his boots. "Bad. Whole section came down during that last storm." He washed his hands in the basin, wincing. His injured hand, the one Clara had stitched, still bothered him. Going to take a week to fix properly. "I could help." Cole turned, surprise flickering across his face. "You hate working outside." "I hate being useless more." Clara set bread and cheese on the table. "Besides, you need an extra pair of hands, and I'm the only ones available. It's hard work, cold, wet, miserable. So is everything else out here?" Clara sat down, met his eyes. "Let me help, Cole, please." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. We start tomorrow at first light." They looked rough, dangerous. The kind of men Clara had learned to avoid back when she was alone and desperate. The leader, a big man with a scar bisecting his face, dismounted and walked toward Cole with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. Clara couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the tension in Cole's shoulders, the way he positioned himself between the strangers and the house. The exchange lasted maybe 5 minutes before the men remounted and rode off, but it felt like hours. When Cole finally came inside, his face was carved from stone. "What did they want?" Clara asked. "Land, water rights, same thing everyone wants out here." Cole set the rifle down carefully. "Man's name is Victor Hale, runs the biggest cattle operation in the valley, wants to buy me out. And you said no." "Of course I said no. This is my ranch." Anger crept into Cole's voice. "I spent 8 years building this place from nothing. I'm not selling to some bastard who already owns half the territory." Clara's hands were shaking. He didn't look like someone who takes no for an answer. He's not. Cole poured himself whiskey even though it was barely noon. "But that's not my problem. I own this land, legal and proper. He can't force me to sell." "Can't he?" Clara thought about the men she'd known in St. Louis, the ones who smiled while they destroyed you. Men like that don't need legal when they have money and guns. Cole drank his whiskey in one swallow. "I can handle Hale." "You can't handle 3 armed men alone." "I've handled worse." "When? When have you handled worse?" Clara's fear was turning to anger. "You've been alone on this ranch for 8 years, Cole. Who have you had to fight? Wolves? Weather? This is different. This is dangerous." "I know it's dangerous." Cole slammed the glass down. "You think I don't know? But what am I supposed to do? Run? Sell everything I've built because some rich son of a bitch decides he wants my water? I'm not saying run. I'm saying be careful. Be smart. I am being smart. That's why I told him to go to hell." Cole grabbed his hat. "I got work to finish. Stay inside until I get back." He left before Clara could respond, and she stood in the empty kitchen feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. Over the next week, small things started going wrong. A section of fence Cole had just repaired was torn down overnight. The well pump broke under circumstances that looked suspiciously deliberate. One of the horses came back to the barn with a cut that could have been from wire but looked more like a knife. Cole didn't say anything, but Clara saw him checking the rifle more often, scanning the horizon like he expected trouble. He started sleeping downstairs again, claiming the fire needed tending, but Clara knew better. He was standing guard. "This is Hale, isn't it?" Clara said one night after another mysterious incident. "He's trying to scare you. He's trying to make me give up." Cole cleaned his rifle methodically. "It won't work. What if he escalates? What if next time it's not just broken fences? Then I'll deal with it." Cole's voice was flat. "This is my land, Clara. I won't let anyone take it from me." The determination in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified her. Because she'd seen this before, seen men dig in their heels over pride and principle until it got them killed. "Your land isn't worth dying for," she said quietly. Cole looked up, and for the first time since the riders came, his expression softened. "It's not just land. It's everything I am. Everything I've built. If I give this up, what do I have left?" Clara wanted to say me, but the word stuck in her throat, because they were married on paper but still living like strangers who shared a house, still dancing around something neither could name. "You have a life," she finally said. "That should count for more than dirt and water rights." Cole didn't answer. He just went back to cleaning his rifle. The next morning, Clara rode into Timber Ridge alone. Cole had gone to check the northern boundary, and Clara made a decision she didn't fully understand. She saddled the mare, still clumsy with tack but getting better, and headed for town with enough coin for supplies and a head full of questions. Murphy looked surprised to see her walk into the saloon mid-morning. "Mrs. Bennett, didn't expect you back so soon." He was wiping down the bar, preparing for the evening crowd. "Everything all right at the ranch?" "That depends." Clara leaned against the bar. "Tell me about Victor Hale." Murphy's expression shuddered. "That's a dangerous question." "Then I'm in the right place to ask it." Clara met his eyes. "Cole won't tell me anything except that Hale wants our land. I need to know what we're dealing with." "We?" Murphy's eyebrow raised. "Sounds like you're planning to stay past spring." "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just tired of being kept in the dark." Clara's voice hardened. "Please, Murphy, I need to know." The barkeep was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Hale showed up about 3 years ago with money from back east and an operation already running before anyone realized what was happening. He bought up small ranches, squeezed out competition, made offers people couldn't refuse. And if they did refuse? Accidents happened, fires, rustling. One rancher who held out woke up to find all his cattle dead from poisoned water." Murphy's voice was grim. "Can't prove it was Hale, but everyone knows." Clara's hands clenched on the bar. "Why doesn't anyone stop him?" "How?" "He's got money, hired guns, connections in Denver. Local law won't touch him." Murphy leaned closer. "Your husband's land sits on the best water source in the valley. Hale's been trying to buy that property for 2 years. Cole's the only one who's told him no and lived to regret it." "Lived to regret it so far," Clara whispered. "Yeah." Murphy's face was sympathetic. "Look, Mrs. Bennett, I like Cole. He's a good man, but good men don't usually win against men like Hale. If I were you, I'd convince your husband to take whatever offer he can get and start over somewhere else. Cole won't leave. This ranch is everything to him. Then he's going to die protecting it." Murphy said it without drama, just fact. "And you'll be alone again. That what you want?" Clara left the saloon with her thoughts spinning. She bought supplies mechanically, flour, salt, coffee, barely seeing what she was purchasing. On the ride back, she tried to figure out what to do with the information Murphy had given her. Tell Cole and watch him dig in deeper? Keep quiet and live with the guilt when something happened? There were no good options. The ranch looked peaceful when she returned, smoke rising from the chimney, horses grazing in the corral. Like nothing was wrong, like they weren't being slowly strangled by a man who wanted their land and had the resources to take it. Cole was in the barn when Clara found him, and the look on his face stopped her cold. "What happened?" she asked. He gestured to one of the stalls. Inside, the mare Clara had been riding lay on her side, breathing hard, foam at her mouth. "Poison. Found her like this 20 minutes ago." Cole's voice was dead. She's dying, Clara. Nothing I can do. Clara knelt beside the mare, ran her hand along the animal's neck. The horse's eyes were glassy with pain, body shaking. Tears burned in Clara's throat. Can't we? No. Cole handed her the rifle. But we can end her suffering. You should do it. Clara recoiled. I can't. You can. You know how. Cole's voice was gentle but firm. She's in pain. Every second she stays alive is torture. You want to help her? This is how. Clara's hands shook as she took the rifle. She'd been practicing for weeks, getting better, but this was different. This was real. This was ending a life to prevent suffering. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Yes, you do. Cole stood beside her. You're strong enough. You've always been strong enough. Clara raised the rifle with trembling hands, aimed at the mare's head. The horse looked at her with those pain-glazed eyes, and Clara thought about all the rides, all the patience this animal had shown her clumsy attempts at horsemanship. She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the barn, and then there was silence. The mare was still. The suffering was over. Clara dropped the rifle and ran outside to vomit behind the barn. Cole followed, pulled her hair back, didn't say anything while she emptied her stomach of everything inside. When she finally straightened, wiping her mouth, the tears came. I killed her, Clara choked out. You ended her pain. There's a difference. Cole pulled Clara against his chest, held her while she cried. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to do that. But I needed you to understand what we're dealing with. Hale killed that horse to send a message. Next time it might be worse. What are we going to do? I don't know yet. Cole's arms tightened around her. But we'll figure it out together. That night, they buried the mare on the hill behind the house. Clara said a few words, even though Cole looked uncomfortable with anything resembling ceremony. Then they stood in silence as the sun set, painting the mountains gold and red. I went to town today, Clara said. Talked to Murphy about Hale. Cole's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He told me about the other ranchers, what happened when they refused to sell. Clara turned to face him. Cole, this man is dangerous. He's not going to stop at poisoned horses. I know. Then why are you being so stubborn? Why not just sell and start somewhere else? Because I'm tired of running. The words exploded out of Cole. My whole life has been running. Running from my father's failure. Running from my brother's death. Running from everyone who said I'd never make anything of myself. I built this ranch with my own hands, Clara. It's the only thing I've ever done that mattered, and I'll be damned if I let some rich bastard take it from me. It's just land. It's not just land to me. Cole's voice was raw. It's proof that I'm worth something, that I can build instead of just destroy, that I'm not my father, drowning in failure and shame. The confession hung between them, stripped of all the careful distance they usually maintained. Clara saw the truth written across Cole's face. This ranch wasn't about property or water rights. It was about proving he deserved to exist. You're worth something because of who you are, Clara said softly, not because of what you own. Easy for you to say. You didn't spend your whole life being told you'd amount to nothing. No, I just spent mine being told my only value was looking pretty and keeping quiet. Bitterness crept into Clara's voice. We've both been running from who we were supposed to be, Cole. Difference is, I know when to stop fighting a battle I can't win. So what are you saying? Give up? Let Hale win? I'm saying there are other ways to fight. Smarter ways. Clara grabbed his arm. What if we went to the authorities in Denver, presented evidence of what Hale's been doing? You think they'd care? Hale probably owns half of them. Then we find allies, other ranchers he's threatened, people who want him stopped. Clara's mind was racing now. Murphy said everyone knows what Hale's doing. That means there are others. We find them. We build a case. We fight him with the law instead of guns. Cole looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. That's not how things work out here. Maybe it should be. Clara's voice was fierce. Maybe instead of dying alone protecting dirt, you try actually living. Try trusting that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to do everything by yourself anymore. The words landed like punches. Cole stared at her, emotions warring across his face, anger, fear, something that might have been hope. You really think it could work? He finally asked. I think it's better than waiting for Hale to burn us out. Clara squeezed his arm. Let me try. Let me go back to town tomorrow, talk to people, see who else has been hurt by him. You work on documenting everything that's happened here. Then we take it all to someone who can actually help. And if that doesn't work, then at least we tried something other than waiting to die. Cole was quiet for a long time, staring out at the ranch he'd built. Finally, he nodded. All right, we try it your way. But if this goes sideways, it won't. Clara hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. Trust me. I do. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did Clara. I don't know when it happened, but I do. Something warm bloomed in Clara's chest. She reached up and kissed him, proper this time, with intention behind it. Cole responded immediately, pulling her closer, kissing her back with an intensity that made her head spin. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. We should go inside, he said quietly. It's getting cold. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and for the first time since their wedding, Cole didn't peel off to sleep by the fire. He followed Clara upstairs. They undressed awkwardly, still learning the geography of each other's bodies, still nervous despite weeks of living together. But when Cole pulled Clara into bed and wrapped himself around her, it felt right, natural, like this was what they'd been moving toward since that first night in the storm. They didn't make love, not yet, but they held each other through the night, and that felt like enough. Clara spent the next 3 days in Timber Ridge, talking to everyone who'd listen. She started with Murphy, who gave her names. Then she visited small ranchers on the outskirts of town, listened to their stories, documented their losses, a farmer whose water had been diverted, a widow whose cattle had stampeded under suspicious circumstances, a young couple who'd sold at a loss after their barn mysteriously caught fire. Every story was the same. Hale made an offer. They refused. Accidents happened. Eventually, they either sold or lost everything anyway. Why didn't anyone fight back? Clara asked one old rancher who'd lost half his herd. Fight with what? Hale's got the law, the money, the muscle. The man spat tobacco juice. Men like us, we just trying to survive. Can't afford to make enemies with someone who can destroy us on a whim. What if you weren't alone? What if there were enough of you to make noise, to demand investigation? The rancher laughed, bitter and tired. Girl, you think we haven't thought of that? We're scared. Simple as that. Hale's made examples of people who spoke up. Most folks would rather lose their land than lose their lives. Clara returned to the ranch each night exhausted and discouraged. But she kept going back, kept talking, kept building a list of people who'd been hurt by Victor Hale's expansion. Cole, meanwhile, documented everything that had happened at their ranch. Broken fences with dates, the poisoned horse, strange riders spotted on their property. He even rode to neighboring ranches and found similar evidence, subtle sabotage designed to look like bad luck or poor management. We've got maybe a dozen families willing to talk, Clara reported one evening. If we can get them all in the same room, present a united front. Hale will crush us before we get that far. Cole rubbed his face. We need something bigger. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Like who? I don't know. A federal marshal, maybe? Someone from outside the territory? Clara thought about it. What about the newspapers? If we could get a reporter from Denver interested, make this public, that might actually work. Cole looked at her with something like admiration. Hale can bribe local law, but he can't control the press. If this became a scandal, if people back east started reading about land grabs in Colorado, he'd have to back off or risk his reputation. Clara felt hope rising. How do we contact a newspaper? I'll ride to Denver, present the evidence in person. Cole was already planning. It's 3 days there, 3 back. If I leave tomorrow, we leave tomorrow, Clara corrected. I'm not staying here alone with Hale circling. It's dangerous, the ride's rough, and Cole. Clara grabbed his hand. We're in this together, remember? You don't get to protect me by leaving me behind. He wanted to argue. She could see it in his face, but finally he nodded. Together then. They spent that night preparing for the trip. Cole checked weapons, ammunition, supplies for a week on the road. Clara packed food, gathered their documentation, wrote out a clear summary of everything that had happened. Around midnight, as they worked by lamplight, someone hammered on the door. Cole grabbed his rifle immediately. Get upstairs. No. Clara picked up the pistol he'd been teaching her to shoot. Not this time. The hammering came again, accompanied by a voice. Bennett, Open up! It's Tom Garrett! Cole and Clara exchanged glances. Garrett, the man who'd mocked Clara in the saloon that first night. What the hell did he want? Cole opened the door with the rifle aimed, and Garrett stumbled inside, bleeding from a gash on his head. Hale's men, he gasped. They're coming. Tonight. Going to burn you out. Clara's stomach dropped. How do you know? Because I was supposed to help them. Garrett slumped against the wall. Hale offered me money to look the other way, but I couldn't. Not after seeing what you're trying to do. Whole town's talking about it, about how you're standing up to him. How many men? Cole demanded. 6, maybe more. They'll be here within the hour. Garrett looked at Clara. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for everything, but you need to run. Now, before they get here. We're not running. Cole's voice was steel. This is our land. Then you're going to die defending it. Garrett grabbed Cole's shirt. Listen to me. These aren't ordinary hired hands. Hale brought in professionals, killers. You can't fight them. Clara's mind raced. 6 armed men against 2 people who barely knew how to shoot. The math was impossible. But running meant losing everything they'd worked for, everything they'd become. What if we don't fight them here? She said suddenly. What if we fight them in town? Both men looked at her like she was crazy. Think about it, Clara continued, the plan forming as she spoke. Hale's counting on this happening quietly, out here where nobody will see. But if we lead them to Timber Ridge, make a public scene, they'll kill us in front of witnesses, Cole said flatly. Or witnesses will force them to back down. Clara grabbed his arm. Murphy said everyone knows what Hale's doing. They're just too scared to act alone. But if we make them choose sides, if we force this into the open where they can't ignore it, it could work, Garrett said slowly. The town's already on edge about Hale. If his men attacked you in the middle of the street, people would have to respond. Or they'd watch us die and do nothing. Cole's face was grim. It's a hell of a gamble. Everything's been a gamble since the day we met. Clara met his eyes. But at least this way we're not dying alone in the dark. Cole stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the craziest. Probably both. Clara tried to smile back, but her face felt frozen. So we do it? We ride for town? We do it. Cole started grabbing supplies. Garrett, can you ride? Yeah, but, Then come with us. We'll need someone who can verify what happened here. Cole loaded ammunition with swift, practiced movements. Clara, pack light. Only what we can carry on horseback. They worked fast, adrenaline overriding fear. Within 20 minutes, they were mounted and riding hard for Timber Ridge, leaving the ranch dark and empty behind them. The ride was nightmarish. Clara had gotten better at horsemanship, but not good enough for this. A desperate race through darkness over rough terrain, with the constant fear that Hale's men would catch them before they reached town. Halfway there, they heard riders behind them. They're coming, Garrett shouted. Faster! They pushed the horses to their limits. Clara clung to her mare, praying she wouldn't fall, wouldn't slow them down, wouldn't be the reason they all died out here in the darkness. Timber Ridge appeared in the distance, a handful of lights against the black. So close. If they could just make it... A shot rang out, then another. Clara heard the whistle of bullets passing too close. Don't stop, Cole yelled. Keep riding. They thundered into town, horses lathered and wild-eyed. Cole fired his rifle into the air, the shots echoing off buildings, waking everyone within miles. Help! Clara screamed at the top of her lungs. Somebody help us! Doors opened. People stumbled outside in nightclothes, confused and angry. Murphy appeared from the saloon, shotgun in hand, and then Hale's men rode into town behind them. 6 riders, heavily armed, faces hard. They pulled up when they saw the crowd gathering, clearly not expecting witnesses. Cole dismounted, rifle aimed, positioning himself between Clara and the hired guns. Clara slid off her horse, pistol shaking in her hands, and stood beside her husband. These men tried to kill us, Cole said loudly, making sure everyone heard. They're working for Victor Hale. He's been trying to force me off my land for months. Tonight, he decided to burn us out. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People looked at each other, uncertain, scared. One of Hale's men, older with a scar across his throat, stepped forward. That's a lie. We were just riding through. With guns drawn? Chasing us into town? Clara's voice was shrill with fear, but she didn't back down. Everyone saw you shooting at us. Nobody saw nothing. The scarred man's hand moved toward his pistol. Now step aside before this gets ugly. Touch that gun and I'll blow your head off. Murphy's voice cut through the tension. He moved to stand beside Cole and Clara, shotgun steady. I know exactly what you are and who sent you. More townspeople stepped forward. Not many, but enough. Ranchers Clara had interviewed. The widow who'd lost her cattle. The young couple whose barn had burned. We all know, one man said. We've all been too scared to say it, but no more. The scarred man looked at the growing crowd, calculating odds. 6 guns against maybe 15 people, most unarmed but angry enough to be dangerous. This ain't over, he finally said. He jerked his horse around and his men followed, riding back the way they came. The crowd stood in tense silence until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then, like a spell breaking, everyone started talking at once. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, still clutching the pistol, her whole body shaking with reaction. Cole knelt beside her, pulled her against him. You did it, he whispered. You crazy, brave woman. You actually did it. We did it. Clara's teeth were chattering. We're alive. We're actually alive. Murphy crouched down beside them. You two need somewhere safe to stay tonight. Hale's not going to take this lying down. We need to get to Denver, Cole said. Get this story to the newspapers before he can spin it different. I'll get you there. Tom Garrett appeared, looking pale but determined. I got connections in Denver. Know some people who'll listen. Why are you helping us? Clara asked. Garrett's face twisted. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of watching good people get destroyed while I do nothing. He offered his hand to help Clara up. Maybe it's too late for me to be a decent person, but I can at least try. They spent the rest of the night in Murphy's saloon, surrounded by people who'd decided to stop being afraid. Stories poured out, years of intimidation, losses, quiet suffering. Clara wrote it all down, her hand cramping, determined to document everything. By dawn, they had a case, not just against isolated incidents, but a pattern of systematic violence and land theft. Enough to make Denver newspapers pay attention, enough to make Victor Hale's life very difficult. Cole and Clara rode out at first light with Garrett and 2 other ranchers willing to testify. They'd sent runners ahead to alert the Denver papers that a story was coming. The trip took 4 days. 4 days of constant vigilance, sleeping in shifts, expecting Hale's men to ambush them at every turn. But they made it. The Rocky Mountain News listened to their story, looked at the evidence, interviewed the witnesses, and printed everything. The headline ran 3 days later. Cattle Barons' Reign of Terror, Colorado ranchers speak out against systematic land theft. It was a scandal, the kind that made politicians nervous and investors jumpy. Within a week, federal marshals arrived in the territory to investigate. Within 2 weeks, several of Hale's hired men were arrested. And within a month, Victor Hale himself was facing charges that would either bankrupt him or put him in prison. Cole and Clara returned to their ranch to find it still standing. Damaged, yes. Hale's men had broken windows and destroyed furniture before fleeing, but the house was intact. The land was theirs. They stood in the yard looking at their scarred but surviving home, and Clara started laughing. What's funny? Cole asked. Nothing. Everything. Clara wiped tears from her eyes. I walked into a blizzard thinking I was going to die. Instead, I married a stubborn cowboy, learned to shoot, and helped take down a cattle baron. My life is insane. Our life, Cole corrected. He pulled her close. And yeah, it's completely insane. They kissed in the ruins of their yard. 2 people who'd survived impossible odds through stubbornness and desperate luck. When they broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against Clara's. I love you, he said quietly. Don't know when it happened exactly, but I do. Clara's breath caught. I love you too, even though you're the most frustrating man I've ever met. Only fair. You're the most terrifying woman I've ever met. They laughed together, and it felt like finally, after months of careful distance, they were building something real. Not just a marriage of convenience, not just survival, something worth fighting for. The rebuilding started the next day. Cole repaired fences while Clara scrubbed the house clean of the damage Hale's men had done. Neighbors came to help. people who'd stood with them that night in town, who'd finally found the courage to push back against fear. A week later, Clara realized her monthly bleeding hadn't come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Cole over dinner. He dropped his fork. "You're certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor." Clara's hand moved to her stomach. Is this? Cole was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "This is everything. You're everything." They held each other in the lamplight, two damaged people who'd found each other in a blizzard and somehow built a life worth living. The future was uncertain. The land was still harsh, winter would come again, but they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. Clara's pregnancy was nothing like the romantic stories she'd read in books. She was sick constantly. Not just mornings, all day, every day, for weeks that stretched into months. The smell of coffee made her retch. Cooking meat became impossible. Even the scent of Cole's soap sent her running outside to vomit into the snow. "This is miserable," she groaned one afternoon, lying on the floor because it was the only position that didn't make her stomach revolt. "How do women survive this?" Cole looked down at her from where he was repairing a chair leg, his expression caught between concern and helplessness. "Should I get the doctor?" "The doctor is 3 hours away and I'd throw up on him the entire ride." Clara closed her eyes. "I'm fine. I'm just complaining." "You're allowed to complain. You're growing a whole person." "I'm growing a demon that hates me." Cole set down his tools and lay on the floor beside her, which was so unexpected that Clara opened her eyes in surprise. He rarely did things like this, spontaneous gestures of solidarity. He was getting better at the physical parts of marriage, the touching and closeness, but it still didn't come naturally to him. "If it's a demon, it's half mine," he said. "So technically you can blame me." "Oh, I do, constantly." But Clara was smiling. She reached for his hand. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." He said it without hesitation. "I don't know anything about babies. What if I'm terrible at it?" "Then you'll learn. Same as everything else." Clara squeezed his fingers. "We're going to mess this up so badly." "Probably." Cole turned his head to look at her. "But at least we'll mess it up together." They lay on the floor holding hands while wind rattled the windows, and the baby, demon or otherwise, made Clara's insides do complicated gymnastics. It wasn't romantic. It was uncomfortable and slightly absurd. But it was theirs. Spring came properly this time, with actual warmth instead of false promises. The ranch began to recover from Hale's sabotage and the damage of 2 brutal winters. Cole worked dawn to dusk repairing fences, expanding the herd, building corrals for the horses he wanted to breed. Clara helped when she could, but the pregnancy slowed her down. She hated it, hated feeling weak and useless after spending months proving she could handle ranch work. But her body had other priorities now. "Stop trying to carry that," Cole said, taking a water bucket from her hands. "You'll hurt yourself." "I'm pregnant, not broken." "You're 7 months pregnant and stubborn as hell." He set the bucket down. "There's a difference between helping and being reckless." "I need to do something. I can't just sit around waiting." Cole's expression softened. "You are doing something. You're keeping our child alive. That's not nothing." Clara wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. He was right, which made it more frustrating. Her whole identity had become wrapped up in being useful, proving her worth through work. Now her body was forcing her to slow down, and she didn't know how to just exist without productivity to justify her presence. "I hate this," she admitted. "I hate feeling helpless." "Then find something you can do sitting down." Cole kissed her forehead. "Weren't you talking about teaching? Maybe start planning that." The suggestion stuck with Clara. She'd mentioned once, months ago during the storm, about wanting to teach children someday. She was surprised Cole remembered. Over the next few weeks, Clara began organizing her thoughts. The territory was growing. More families were settling in the valley. Most children never learned to read because there wasn't a school for 50 miles. She could change that. Clara started small. She wrote to the Territorial Education Board requesting information about establishing a school. She inventoried the books in the house, Cole's small collection, plus a few she'd brought from St. Louis. She began drafting lesson plans, even though she had no students yet. It gave her something to think about besides the growing weight in her belly and the fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, because Clara was terrified. Not just of childbirth, though that scared her plenty, but of failing, of being a terrible mother. of bringing a child into this harsh world only to watch them suffer or die like so many frontier children did. She didn't talk about these fears with Cole. He had enough to worry about. But one night in late summer, with Clara too uncomfortable to sleep, she found herself crying quietly in bed while Cole was supposed to be asleep beside her. "What's wrong?" His voice was alert immediately. He never fully slept anymore, always listening for threats. "Nothing. I'm fine." "Clara." He sat up, lit the lamp. "Talk to me." She wanted to deflect, to protect him from her anxiety, but they'd promised honesty, even when it was hard. "What if I can't do this?" The words came out broken. "What if I'm a terrible mother? What if something goes wrong and the baby dies, or I die, or—" Cole pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her awkward, swollen body. "You're going to be a wonderful mother. You're the strongest person I know. Strength doesn't matter if something goes wrong during birth. Women die, Cole. Strong women, good women, they die and leave their babies motherless. You're not going to die." "You can't promise that." He was quiet for a long moment. "No, I can't, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. And if the worst happens," his voice cracked slightly, "if the worst happens, I'll make sure our child knows how brave you were, how much you fought to give them life." Clara cried harder because it was the most Cole had ever said about his feelings, and because she knew he meant every word. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." He held her tighter. "But we've survived everything else. We'll survive this too." They stayed like that until Clara's tears stopped and exhaustion finally dragged her toward sleep. The fear didn't go away, but it felt more manageable when shared. August brought suffocating heat and Clara's growing impatience with her own body. She was huge, uncomfortable, and ready to be done with pregnancy. The baby kicked constantly, like it was training for prize fighting. "This child is going to be a terror," Clara said one afternoon, watching her stomach move in strange, alien ways. "Look at that. It's trying to escape." Cole put his hand on her belly, felt the strong kick against his palm, and grinned like an idiot. "Strong. That's good. Easy for you to say. You're not the one getting beaten up from the inside." They'd decided to turn the smaller bedroom into a nursery. Cole built a cradle from scratch, sanding it until there wasn't a single rough edge that could hurt delicate skin. Clara sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her stitches neat despite her damaged fingers. The community began helping in ways Clara hadn't expected. The widow whose cattle had stampeded brought baby clothes her own children had outgrown. Murphy donated a rocking chair from the saloon's storage. Even Tom Garrett appeared one day with a hand-carved rattle, looking embarrassed but determined to contribute. "We take care of our own," he said when Clara tried to thank him. "You two stood up when the rest of us were too scared. Least we can do is make sure your baby's got what it needs." Clara was so touched she cried, which had become her default response to everything lately. Pregnancy had turned her emotions into something wild and unpredictable. The baby came 3 weeks early during a thunderstorm that made the house shake. Clara's water broke while she was making breakfast. She stood in the kitchen staring at the puddle on the floor, her mind going completely blank with panic. "Cole?" Her voice came out strangled. "Cole!" He appeared from outside, took one look at her face in the water, and went pale. "Is it... the baby's coming?" For a man who'd survived impossible winters and faced down armed killers, Cole looked absolutely terrified. "Now? Right now?" "I don't think it's giving us a choice." Clara grabbed the table as the first contraction hit, pain radiating through her body like lightning. "You need to get the doctor. Fast!" Cole ran. Clara heard him shouting for someone, anyone, then the sound of hoofbeats disappearing into the storm. She was alone. The contractions came faster than she expected, harder than anything she'd imagined. Clara tried to remember what she'd read about childbirth, what other women had told her, but all knowledge disappeared under the weight of pain. She made it to the bedroom somehow, got herself onto the bed. Rain hammered the windows, thunder shook the walls, and the baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. Time became meaningless. There was only pain and breathing, and the primal terror of her body doing something completely beyond her control. The door slammed open. Clara thought it was Cole with the doctor, but instead it was Sarah Mitchell, the young woman whose barn had burned, who'd testified in Denver. "Doctor's out at the Henderson place with a difficult birth," Sarah said, washing her hands in the basin. "Could be hours before he can get here, but I've helped with 6 births, including my own 2. You're not doing this alone." Clara wanted to protest, to insist on waiting for the actual doctor, but another contraction stole her breath, and all she could do was grip Sarah's hand like a lifeline. "That's it," Sarah said calmly. "Breathe through it. Don't fight the pain. Work with it." The next hours were a blur of agony and effort. Sarah coached her through contractions, wiped her forehead, told her when to push and when to rest. The storm raged outside, matching the violence of what was happening inside Clara's body. Cole returned halfway through, soaked and wild-eyed. "Doctor's not coming, is she?" "She's doing fine," Sarah said firmly. "But you need to boil water, get clean towels, and stay out of the way unless I call for you." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at Clara's face had him moving. He disappeared downstairs, and Clara could hear him crashing around the kitchen, probably destroying things in his panic. "Your husband's terrified," Sarah observed with a slight smile. "Good," Clara gasped between contractions. "He should be. This is his fault. Men always think they're the tough ones until they see what women's bodies can do." Sarah checked Clara's progress, nodded. "You're almost there. Next few pushes, you should be holding your baby." Clara didn't believe her, couldn't believe this would ever end, but she pushed anyway because what else could she do? Her body had taken over, following instincts older than thought. And then, in a rush of pain and relief and something that felt like her entire body turning inside out, the baby came. A cry split the air, thin and reedy, but strong. "It's a girl," Sarah said, quickly working to clean the baby. A perfect, beautiful girl. Clara couldn't see through her tears, couldn't do anything except sob with relief and exhaustion. Sarah placed the baby on Clara's chest, impossibly small, impossibly real, making angry noises about being born into a thunderstorm. "Hello?" Clara whispered, touching the tiny face with shaking fingers. "Hello, little one." Cole appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd been through a war. His eyes found Clara first, checking that she was alive, then dropped to the bundle in her arms. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Is that your daughter?" Clara shifted so he could see better. "We have a daughter, Cole." He crossed the room in 2 steps, knelt beside the bed, stared at the baby like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe in. "She's so small." "She's perfect." Sarah was cleaning up, giving them space. 7 pounds, if I'm judging right. Good lungs, good color. You did well, Clara." Clara barely heard her. She was too focused on the baby, their daughter, who'd stopped crying and was now looking around with dark, unfocused eyes. "What do we name her?" Cole asked, his voice rough with emotion. They discussed names but never settled on anything. Now, looking at this tiny person they'd created, Clara knew exactly what felt right. "Emma," she said. "After your mother." Cole's hand covered his mouth. For a moment, Clara thought she'd made a mistake, pushed too far. Then he nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Emma," he repeated. "Emma Bennett." Sarah left after making sure both Clara and the baby were stable, promising to check on them tomorrow. Cole helped Clara get cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, his hands gentle despite their shaking. Then they lay in bed together, Cole, Clara, and Emma, while the storm finally broke and stars appeared through gaps in the clouds. "I was so scared," Clara admitted. "I thought I might die. I thought I'd lost you both." Cole's arm tightened around her. "When I couldn't find the doctor, when I rode back and heard you screaming, I'm here. We're both here." Clara looked down at Emma, already asleep against her chest. "We made a person, Cole. An actual person." "We did." He touched Emma's tiny hand with one finger. "I don't know how to be a father, and I don't know how to be a mother, but we'll figure it out." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "We always do." The first weeks with Emma were brutal. Nobody had warned Clara that newborns basically never slept for longer than 2 hours at a stretch, that they cried for reasons that made no sense, that feeding would hurt and exhaust her in ways pregnancy never had. Cole tried to help, but there was only so much he could do. He took over all the household chores, did the cooking, handled everything outside. But the baby needed Clara in ways she couldn't delegate. I'm so tired, Clara said one night, or maybe it was morning. Time had lost all meaning. I can't remember what sleep feels like. Give her to me. Cole took Emma, who immediately started crying. Go sleep for a few hours. I'll figure it out. She needs to eat. Then I'll bring her to you when she's hungry. But you need rest, or you're going to collapse. His voice was firm. Go, Clara. I've got this. Clara was too exhausted to argue. She stumbled to bed and fell asleep instantly, not waking until Emma's cries pulled her back to consciousness 3 hours later. Cole appeared with the baby, looking haggard but triumphant. We survived, he announced. She cried a lot, but we survived. They developed a routine slowly, painfully. Clara handled feeding and most of the night wakings. Cole took over everything else, including pacing with Emma for hours when she wouldn't settle. They were both exhausted, both overwhelmed, both wondering what the hell they'd gotten themselves into. But there were moments, perfect, crystalline moments, when Emma would smile in her sleep or grab Cole's finger with her tiny hand, or make a sound that might have been a laugh, and suddenly all the exhaustion was worth it. She's beautiful, Cole said one evening, watching Emma sleep in her cradle. How did we make something so perfect? I don't know. Clara leaned against him. Doesn't feel like we deserve her. We don't, but we've got her anyway. He kissed Clara's temple. We'll do better, be better, for her. As Emma grew, the ranch grew with her. Word spread about Clara's plan to open a school, and families started asking when she'd begin teaching. By the time Emma was 6 months old, Clara had 5 students meeting in the Bennett's main room twice a week. It started small, basic reading and arithmetic for children who'd never held a book. But Clara discovered she loved teaching, loved watching young minds light up when letters suddenly made words, when numbers began making sense. Cole built benches and a proper chalkboard, donated books they couldn't really afford, took pride in watching his wife become something more than just a rancher's partner. You're good at this, he observed one afternoon watching Clara work with a struggling student. Natural. I like it. Clara looked up, smiling. I like feeling useful again. You've always been useful. I know, but this is different. She gestured at the small classroom. This is building something that'll last after we're gone. These children will remember learning to read here. They'll teach their own children. It matters. Cole understood. It was the same reason he'd been so stubborn about keeping the ranch. Legacy. Proof that their lives meant something beyond just surviving. Emma's first birthday came during another harsh winter, though not as bad as the one that had brought Cole and Clara together. They celebrated with a small cake Clara had learned to bake and gifts from neighbors who'd become something like family. Tom Garrett carved Emma a set of wooden blocks. Sarah Mitchell sewed a dress with tiny embroidered flowers. Murphy donated a savings bond for Emma's future education. She's got a whole community, Clara said, watching their daughter demolish her cake with enthusiastic hands. That's something I never had growing up. Me neither. Cole wiped frosting off Emma's face. But she will. We'll make sure of it. The years that followed weren't easy. There were droughts that killed crops, winters that took livestock, illnesses that scared them both senseless. Emma got a fever when she was 2 that had Clara and Cole taking turns sitting up with her for 3 days straight. A fall from a horse when she was 4 left Cole with broken ribs that never quite healed right. Money was always tight. The ranch provided enough to survive, but rarely more. Clara's teaching brought in a little income, but not much. They wore patched clothes and ate simple food and made do with what they had. But they had each other, and Emma, and a home they'd built through sheer stubbornness. When Emma was 5, Clara realized she was pregnant again. This time there was no panic, no fear, just quiet acceptance and Cole's hand finding hers across the dinner table. Another one, he said, something like wonder in his voice. Another one, Clara agreed. Are we insane? Absolutely. But he was smiling. When has that ever stopped us? The second baby, a boy they named James after Cole's brother, came easier than Emma. Clara knew what to expect this time, and Sarah was there from the start, coaching her through with the confidence of experience. James was quieter than Emma had been, more serious. Where Emma was all energy and chaos, James observed everything with dark eyes that missed nothing. He's like you, Clara told Cole, watching, thinking, not saying much. Poor kid. but Cole looked pleased. Emma was fascinated by her new brother, constantly wanting to help feed him or rock him or just stare at him like he was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. Gentle, Clara reminded her for the 100th time. He's still very small. When will he get big enough to play? Emma asked. Not for a while yet, but you can talk to him. He likes your voice. Emma took this responsibility seriously, telling James elaborate stories about the horses and the chickens and the adventures she'd have when she was big enough to ride by herself. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, Ruth, named for Clara's mother. Then another son, Thomas. The house that had once been silent and empty filled with noise and chaos and the constant needs of 4 children under 10. Clara sometimes felt like she was drowning. The teaching had stopped when Ruth was born. She didn't have time anymore. Between the children and the house and helping Cole with ranch work, there weren't enough hours in the day. I can't do this, she said one particularly bad evening, when all 4 children were crying simultaneously and dinner was burning, and she'd gotten maybe 3 hours of sleep in the past 2 days. I can't keep doing this. Cole took the screaming baby, sent Emma to check on the other children, and pulled Clara into his arms. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm falling apart. Then fall apart. I've got you. He held her while she cried, then helped salvage dinner, got the children settled, and insisted Clara sleep while he handled the night wakings. The next morning, Clara woke to find Cole had already fed everyone breakfast and was currently teaching Emma how to collect eggs while James watched with serious concentration. You need help, he said when Clara appeared. Real help. We can't keep doing this alone. We can't afford help. Then we figure something out. Cole's voice was firm. Maybe one of the older girls from town wants to learn about ranch work. Maybe Sarah's daughter, someone who can come a few times a week, help with the children and the house. They found Mary Callahan, a 16-year-old from a large family who was happy to earn money helping the Bennetts. She came 3 days a week, handled the younger children while Clara taught the older ones, and generally made life manageable again. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about frontier life ever was. But it worked. The children grew. Emma became tall and fearless, more comfortable on horseback than on foot. James developed his father's quiet intensity and his mother's sharp mind. Ruth was stubborn and sweet in equal measure. Thomas was still too young to show much personality beyond demanding and loud. The ranch expanded slowly. Cole's horse breeding program began attracting buyers from Denver and beyond. Clara reopened her school, this time in a separate building Cole built specifically for teaching. Students came from families 20 miles away, boarding with neighbors during the week. They were building something bigger than themselves, a legacy that would outlast them. One evening, after getting all 4 children finally settled for the night, Clara and Cole sat on the porch watching the sun set over mountains they'd learned to love and fear in equal measure. We did it, Clara said quietly. We actually did it. Did what? Built a life, a real life, not just survival. She leaned against him. When I walked through that blizzard thinking I was going to die, I never imagined this. A home, children, you. Cole's arm came around her shoulders. When I proposed to a frozen stranger in Murphy's saloon, I was just trying to get through another winter alone. I didn't know I was finding everything I'd been missing. We were both running from who we used to be. Maybe, but we ran straight into each other. He kissed the top of her head. And somehow, that made all the difference. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd survived impossible odds to build something real. The children were chaos. The ranch was work. The land was harsh. But they had each other. And after everything they'd been through, the blizzard, the threats, the fear, the pain, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Inside the house, Emma started crying about something, which set off James, which woke up Ruth, which made Thomas scream. Cole and Clara looked at each other and started laughing. Ready? Cole asked. Always. Clara stood, offering him her hand. Let's go save our children from each other. They walked back inside together, into the noise and chaos and beautiful disaster of the life they'd built. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and hard and exhausting. But it was theirs. Every complicated, impossible piece of it. And they wouldn't change a single thing. 20 years changed everything and nothing. The wild Colorado frontier that had nearly killed Clara softened into something resembling civilization. Timber Ridge grew from a rough settlement into an actual town with proper streets, a church, a general store that sold things besides survival supplies. The railroad pushed through in 1895, connecting them to Denver in hours instead of days. But the mountains stayed the same. Still beautiful. Still dangerous. Still demanding respect from anyone fool enough to think they'd been conquered. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching those mountains turn gold in the sunset, her hands wrinkled and scarred from decades of work. She was 43 years old and felt every single year in her bones. Her damaged fingers ached constantly now, especially in winter. Gray streaked her hair, lines marked her face. She'd never felt more alive. "Mama, Emma's here," Ruth called from outside. Clara smiled. Emma had married a rancher from the next valley 3 years ago, a good man named David, who treated her like she hung the moon. They had a baby daughter now, Clara's first grandchild, a squirming bundle of chaos named Alice. Emma came through the door carrying Alice and looking exhausted in that particular way new mothers always did. "Please tell me you'll watch her for a few hours. I need to sleep, or I'm going to lose my mind." "Of course." Clara took Alice, who immediately grabbed her grandmother's hair. "How long has it been?" "Since I slept? 3 days, maybe 4. Time stopped having meaning." Emma collapsed into a chair. "How did you do this 4 times? I can barely handle one." "Badly. I did it badly." Clara bounced Alice gently. "Your father and I were constantly exhausted and confused. We just got good at hiding it." "That's not reassuring." "It's not supposed to be. It's honest." Clara looked at her daughter, her firstborn, who'd made her a mother during a thunderstorm. "You're doing fine, Emma. Better than fine." Emma's eyes filled with tears, which seemed to be another universal constant of new motherhood. "I don't feel fine. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let us help. That's what family does." Clara shifted Alice to one hip. "Go upstairs, sleep in your old room. I'll wake you if Alice needs to eat." Emma didn't argue. She dragged herself upstairs, and Clara heard the bedroom door close with the finality of someone who'd reached their limit. Cole appeared from the barn, saw Clara with the baby, and grinned. Emma finally admitted she needs help? Admitted might be too strong a word, more like collapsed under the weight of sleep deprivation. Clara handed him Alice. "Your granddaughter wants to meet you." Cole took the baby with the confidence of someone who'd raised 4 children and survived. Alice stared at him with dark, serious eyes that reminded Clara painfully of James. James. 20 years old now and working a ranch in Wyoming. He'd left 2 years ago, needing space to become his own person instead of just Cole Bennett's son. He wrote occasionally, brief letters that said everything and nothing. Clara missed him with an ache that never quite faded. "She looks like Emma did," Cole said, touching Alice's tiny hand. Same stubborn expression. "She comes by it honestly." Clara leaned against him. "We made stubborn children. Wonder where they got that from." They stood together watching the sunset, a grandfather and grandmother who'd somehow survived long enough to hold their daughter's daughter. The impossibility of it struck Clara sometimes. That she'd gone from freezing to death in a blizzard to this, a full life, a family, a legacy. Ruth came running from the schoolhouse, now 15 and helping Clara teach. She was passionate about education in a way that made Clara's heart swell with pride. "Mama, Mrs. Henderson wants to know if we can take her youngest for lessons. He's only 5, but he's already reading simple words." "Of course we can. Tell her to bring him Monday." Clara smiled at her daughter. "You're good with the young ones. Maybe you should handle his lessons." Ruth's face lit up. "Really? You'd let me teach him?" "You've been helping me for 2 years now. It's time you started leading." Clara touched Ruth's cheek. "You're ready." Thomas appeared next, 12 years old and covered in mud from helping his father. He stopped when he saw the baby, his face transforming from typical boyish wildness to surprising gentleness. "Can I hold her?" he asked. "Wash your hands first," Cole said. "Then yes." Thomas ran to the pump, scrubbed frantically, then returned to carefully take Alice from his grandfather. He held her like she was made of glass, talking softly about the new foal in the barn and how she'd get to ride it when she was bigger. Clara watched her youngest son with the newest member of their family and felt something catch in her throat. This was what they'd built. Not just a ranch or a school or a life, but this. Generations connected by blood and love and stubborn refusal to give up. You all right? Cole asked quietly. Just thinking. Clara wiped her eyes. About how far we've come. Long way from that blizzard. Long way from everything. She looked at him. Do you ever regret it? Proposing to a stranger you'd known for 20 minutes? Cole was quiet for a moment, considering seriously. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't, if I just let you walk away. He pulled her closer. Then I look at all this. Our children, our grandchild, the life we built, and I can't regret anything. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. The hard parts made us who we are. Exactly. He kissed her temple. Every fight, every fear, every time we almost quit, it all mattered. It all brought us here. That night, after Emma woke up refreshed and took Alice home, after Ruth finished her studying and Thomas went to bed, Claire and Cole sat by the fire like they had 1,000 times before. But Cole seemed restless. He kept shifting, wincing slightly. Your ribs bothering you again? Clara asked. Little bit. Weather's changing. He rubbed his side where he'd broken them years ago. Getting old, Clara. We both are. She moved to sit beside him, worked her fingers into the muscles around the old injury. But we're still here. For now. Cole's voice was quiet. But I've been thinking about what happens when we're not. Clara's hands stilled. That's morbid. That's practical. He turned to look at her. I'm 58 years old. You're 43. We've got maybe 20 more years if we're lucky. I need to know our children can keep this place running when we're gone. They will. Emma's got David. James will come back eventually. Ruth and Thomas are still young, and the ranch is struggling, Clara. Has been for 2 years now. Cole's voice was heavy. Cattle prices keep dropping. Competition's getting fierce. That railroad that was supposed to help us is helping bigger operations ship beef cheaper than we can match. Clara had known things were tight. She'd noticed Cole working longer hours, taking fewer breaks, selling horses he'd planned to keep. But she hadn't realized how bad it was. How bad? She asked. Bad enough that I'm considering offers again. He said it like admitting defeat. Not from anyone like Hale. He died in prison 5 years ago. But from legitimate buyers who see value in our water rights and location. You want to sell the ranch? Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. After everything we fought for? I don't want to, but I might need to. Cole rubbed his face. We're not making enough to sustain 4 children. Emma's settled, but James needs help starting his own place. Ruth will want to go to college if her teaching continues. Thomas doesn't even know what he wants yet. They need money we don't have. Clara felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. The ranch had been the constant in their lives for over 20 years. The thing Cole had been willing to die protecting. And now he was talking about selling it like it was just property. What would we do? She asked. Where would we go? I don't know. Maybe into town? You could expand the school, make it official. I could... He stopped, looking lost. I don't know what I'd do. This ranch is all I know. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, both of them trying to imagine a life without this land they'd poured everything into. Let's not make any decisions tonight, Clara finally said. Let's sleep on it. Talk to the children. Figure out what makes sense. All right. But Cole looked like a man who'd already made up his mind and was just waiting for everyone else to accept it. Over the next few weeks, Clara watched Cole withdraw into himself the way he used to when they first married. He worked obsessively, pushing himself too hard, eating too little. She'd catch him standing on the hill where they'd buried the first mare, staring at the mountains like they held answers. Emma noticed during her next visit, What's wrong with Pa? He's thinking about selling the ranch. Clara said it out loud for the first time and hated how it sounded. Final. Emma's face went white. He can't. This is our home. It's also a business that's failing. Claire kept her voice level. Your father's trying to do what's best for all of you. By giving up everything he built? Emma's voice rose. That's not what's best. That's just giving up. Sometimes giving up is the smart choice. You don't believe that. Emma grabbed her mother's hands. You're the one who convinced him to fight Hale, who made him see there were other ways besides dying alone protecting dirt. Don't tell me you're ready to just sell everything now. Clara didn't have an answer, because Emma was right. She didn't believe it. but she also didn't know how to fix the financial reality they were facing. James came home 3 weeks later, unannounced, riding in like he'd never left. "Heard you're thinking about selling," he said to Cole without preamble. "That true? Where'd you hear that?" Cole looked surprised and slightly angry. "Emma wrote. Said you're giving up." James dismounted, stood facing his father with the same stubborn set to his jaw. "So I came to talk you out of it." "This isn't your decision to make." "The hell it isn't. This ranch is my legacy too. You don't get to sell it without at least explaining why." They argued in the yard while Clara watched from the window. Father and son, both too stubborn to back down, both convinced they were right. It was painful and beautiful and reminded Clara of every fight she and Cole had ever had. Eventually they came inside, both looking exhausted. "James has a proposal," Cole said, his voice careful. "I told him I'd listen." James laid out his plan. He'd been working in Wyoming learning modern ranching techniques. He'd saved money. He knew people who were doing things differently: selective breeding, better water management, cooperative selling to get better prices. "Let me come back," James said. "Give me 2 years to turn things around. If I can't make it work, then we'll talk about selling. But at least give me the chance to save this place." Cole looked at his son, his serious, quiet son, who'd left to find himself and come back with purpose. "Why? Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because you spent your whole life proving you were worth something by building this ranch. And I spent my whole life trying to be worthy of being your son." James's voice cracked slightly. "Let me prove I learned something. Let me show you I can keep what you built alive." Clara saw Cole's face crumple, saw 20 years of unexpressed emotion surface in one moment. He pulled James into a rough embrace. "You don't have anything to prove," Cole said. "You never did. But if you want to try, we'll try together." James came home. He brought new ideas, new energy, and a work ethic that rivaled his father's. Together with Cole, they started implementing changes: better breeding programs, cooperative agreements with neighboring ranchers for bulk shipping, diversification into dairy cattle alongside beef. It was hard work, harder than anything Clara had seen Cole do in years. But it gave him purpose again, reminded him why he'd fought so hard to keep this land in the first place. Ruth threw herself into expanding the school. She wrote to territorial education officials, applied for funding, developed a curriculum that went beyond basic literacy. Within a year, the Bennett School was recognized as one of the best in the region. Thomas, watching his siblings find their passions, announced he wanted to be a veterinarian. "Animals are easier than people," he explained, "and we need good animal doctors out here. Everyone's always losing livestock to things that could have been prevented." Clara and Cole scraped together money they didn't have to send Thomas to veterinary school in Denver. It meant more years of tight budgets and careful spending. But watching their youngest son leave with hope in his eyes made it worth every penny. The years passed. The ranch stabilized under James's management, then thrived. Ruth's school expanded to include boarding for students from across the territory. Emma had 3 more children, making Clara a grandmother 4 times over. Thomas graduated and returned to set up practice in Timber Ridge. Cole's health began failing when he was 65. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of decades of hard labor catching up. His knees gave out first, making riding difficult. Then his heart started acting up, irregular beats that scared Clara senseless. "I'm fine," he insisted after one particularly bad episode. "Just old." "You're not fine, you're stubborn." Clara made him sit down. "You need to slow down, Cole. Let James handle more of the ranch work." "James has his own family to worry about. I can still pull my weight." "Nobody's asking you to stop, just to acknowledge you're not 30 anymore." Clara's voice softened. "I need you to be here, you stubborn old man. Our grandchildren need to know you." That got through. Cole started delegating more, spending time teaching his grandchildren instead of killing himself with work. Clara would find him in the barn with Alice and her siblings, showing them how to gentle horses, telling them stories about the old days. "Your grandmother walked through a blizzard," she heard him tell 8-year-old Alice one afternoon. "Came into town half frozen and desperate. Everyone thought she'd die by morning, but she didn't," Alice said with the confidence of a child who knew her grandmother was invincible. "No, she didn't, because she's the strongest person I ever met." Cole's voice was soft. "Stronger than me, stronger than this land. She saved my life by saying yes to a crazy proposal from a lonely cowboy. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She turned away before they could see her crying. That evening, she and Cole sat on the porch watching another sunset. They did this most nights now, talking less than they used to because they'd already said most of what needed saying. "Do you remember that storm?" Clara asked. "The one where we finally kissed?" "I remember every storm we survived." Cole took her hand. "The first one brought you to me. The second one made us real. All the others just proved we could weather anything together. We got lucky. We got stubborn. There's a difference." He squeezed her fingers, the damaged ones that had never fully healed but had built a life anyway. "Love isn't about luck, Clara. It's about showing up every day even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Is that what this was? All these years?" Clara looked at him. "Love? What else would you call it?" Clara thought about it. About the desperate proposal in a saloon, about learning to survive together, about fights and fears and moments of grace, about building something from nothing through sheer determination. "I'd call it choosing each other," she said finally, "every single day, even when we didn't like each other much, even when it would have been easier to quit, especially then." Cole pulled her closer. "That's the secret nobody tells you. Love isn't the feeling, it's the choosing, over and over, until choosing each other becomes as natural as breathing." They sat in silence, two old people who'd somehow found each other in a blizzard and built a lifetime from that impossible beginning. Cole died 3 years later, quietly in his sleep after a day spent teaching his great-grandson how to rope. Clara found him in the morning, still and peaceful, gone somewhere she couldn't follow. She sat beside him for a long time, holding his cold hand, remembering everything. The funeral brought people from across the territory. Ranchers Cole had helped, students Clara had taught, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed because a lonely cowboy had been brave enough to propose marriage to a frozen stranger. "What do I do now?" Clara asked Emma after everyone left. "How do I keep going without him?" "The same way you always have." Emma held her mother. "You choose to, every day, the way he taught you." Clara lived another 12 years after Cole died. She watched her school become a permanent institution, watched James expand the ranch until it was the most successful operation in 3 counties, watched Ruth become a renowned educator, watched Thomas save countless animals and train a new generation of veterinarians. She held her great-great-grandchildren and told them stories about the old days, about a blizzard that changed everything, about a cowboy who saw strength where others saw weakness, about building a life from desperation and stubbornness and the refusal to give up. When Clara's heart finally gave out at 77, she died surrounded by 4 generations of family in the house Cole had built for a family he never thought he'd have. They buried her beside Cole on the hill overlooking the ranch. The whole community came to pay respects to the woman who'd walked through a blizzard and ended up building a legacy. Years later, decades later, the Bennett Ranch still stood. The family still worked the land, the schools still taught children whose grandparents had been taught by Clara. And people still told stories about the desperate woman and the lonely cowboy who'd made an impossible bargain in the middle of a storm. Because that's what love is, in the end. Not the dramatic moments or the perfect words, but the daily choice to show up, to fight for each other, to build something that outlasts you. Clara and Cole had built something that mattered, not because it was easy or perfect or free from pain, but because they chose each other every single day, even when choosing was hard. Especially when choosing was hard. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. The Bennett family gathered every year on the anniversary of Clara and Cole's wedding, standing on that hill where their grandparents were buried, telling the story to the newest generation. About a blizzard, about a proposal, about 2 broken people who found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. About how love isn't finding someone perfect. It's finding someone willing to build a life with you, one stubborn day at a time, through every storm that comes. That was the legacy. Not the land or the money or the success, but the lesson that kept echoing through generations. When you find someone worth fighting for, you fight, you show up, you choose them, every single day, no matter what. And somehow, impossibly, that's enough. More than enough. It's everything.
Don't worry, you have a grave support now. I have ult, Ben, if you want to make something happen. 2 peas in a pod, true. Reloom or Toxicrope. I would like to be the one that looks like a vagina. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
No, wait, make us like, no, wait, G-Man makes us like actual, whatchamacallit? The gym leaders? Cloister, yeah, I'd like to look like, I'd like to be the vagina one.
My turret is just dead, bro. I like literally just don't get to do anything. And Poppy's literally not getting any value from walking there, so like, I don't understand.
Zed's behind you. I don't even know. I tried to save you. I was like, here's the play.